Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Nika Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What if Deku had Hollow Void Quirk? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Thursday, March 6th, XX46, Midoriya Residence. It sounded like an icicle snapping in the late winter air, a fist thrown with purpose, a nose forced to bend at an angle nobody was meant to endure. Izuku stared at his fist. He hadn't even felt the punch. He smiled that same practiced smile, the one he used for saving people, to be like All Might. The crowd cheered. Children with crooked teeth waved back at him. His costume simple, yet perfect, something truly his gleamed under the light. Pride burned in his chest like a beacon. You did it. I can't believe you did it, a voice called, warm and familiar. I'm so proud of you, Izuku. He turned toward it, but the sun caught his eyes. Beep, beep, beep. He shielded his face. The sound again. An alarm? Another villain attack? Right, not important. He had won. He looked down. His costume was gone. Wait. Oh. A dream. And then he was falling. Down, down, down so far that gravity seemed to flip, his stomach left behind while the world blurred into streaks of color. A pale hand reached for him from the chaos. He reached back. Their fingers brushed cold, so cold his skin turned blue, then purple, then black. Flesh cracked and fell away in brittle flakes. No pain. Right. A dream. Beep, beep, be. Izuku woke with a gasp, hand slamming the alarm clock. Agony shot through his knuckles. The room mocked him. He needed to clean, to move, to forget. But he sat there instead, shaking, chest tight, breathing shallow. When the tremor finally slowed, he pushed the covers aside and watched them slide onto the carpet where they'd stay until he felt like pretending to sleep again. If he ever did. All Might covered his walls. Pristine comics in slip covers and personal notebooks filled the shelves, some with edges burned, pages warped, but he kept them anyway. Relics of effort. Of hope. Of a time that felt, so long ago yet was within weeks of this moment. His desk was chaos. The UA letter still lay open, a week old. He touched his face before realizing he was crying again. Crying those DMN stupid tears that never seemed to leave him be. Even when his chest felt hollow, they would run, even when he felt like he couldn't cry anymore, they reminded him he could. He'd gotten into general studies. That was something. The best a quirkless boy could hope for. The best he could have done. There was even a small, pathetic part of him that was relieved he hadn't failed out of UA entirely. But even that fragile sliver of good meant nothing now. A laugh slipped out, rough, weak, the kind that had no humor in it. He tilted his head back, staring at the posters plastered across his wall. All Might's smile beamed down at him from half a dozen angles, bright and heroic and impossibly far away. Guess I failed you, huh? All Might? His voice cracked around the name. Something inside him twisted sharp, bitter, ugly, and forced itself upward into his throat. What? What would you have said to me? If I had ever gotten the chance to ask that stupid question. Can I be a hero? The words trembled as they left him, too broken to disguise. I bet you would have said no. He addressed the posters like they could hear him, like they were something more than faded paper taped to a wall. But for Izuku, All Might had always been more than a poster. He had been a father figure made of light. A god of hope. A reminder that someone somewhere could see potential in people like him, even if no one in his real life ever had. When things were bad, Izuku would watch videos of All Might's speeches and pretend the words were meant for him. Pretend he wasn't invisible. Pretend he wasn't a burden. Pretend he hadn't been born, already behind everyone else. Not that All Might would ever know his name. Much less the promise a child makes to a statue. To a symbol too large, too bright, too far above to ever look back down. That was his lot in life, of course. To want something that was never meant for him. To hope in a world that had decided he wasn't worth the effort. The weight in his chest didn't ease. It tightened. He wiped at his eyes, but the tears didn't stop, they only smeared across his palms, damp and warm, soaking into the cuffs of the thin shirt he wore. The room felt too small. Too loud. Too full of things that used to matter. Notebooks. Posters. Dreams. All Might staring down at him from the walls, all different versions of himself with that endlessly pride-filled smile. Izuku pulled his gaze away, but the ache followed him. It didn't matter how he turned. It didn't matter where he looked. Everything reminded him of the one thing he could never be. The last 11 months had been a waste. If he had started earlier, pushed harder, eaten right, trained right. Maybe he could have earned a single point. 1 point. 1 moment of proving he wasn't pretending. He squeezed his eyes shut, but that only made the memories come faster. He remembered lining up at the gate that day. The noise. The bodies pressed together. The endless shuffle of shoes across the pavement. A wall of voices that felt like it was closing in on him. His stomach had turned itself inside out. He'd thrown up twice before the physical exam even began. The smell of metal and oil and sweat had clung to him, too thick, too loud. His hands had trembled so violently that he could barely tie his shoes. Everywhere he looked, there were eyes. People staring. Whispering. Laughing. A crowd that felt miles tall. He'd wanted to disappear into the concrete beneath his feet. Then the gates opened. And he ran. Or tried to. He had no plan. No weapon. No quirk. Just adrenaline and a borrowed dream that slipped through his fingers the moment he touched it. The city-sized arena swallowed him whole. Open sky stretching forever above him, the empty streets echoing with metal screams and pounding footsteps. He'd never realized how small he was until he stood alone in a place built for giants. He had almost died. 3 times. A one-pointer had cornered him in an alley, metal claw snapping inches from his face. The sound of gears grinding had drowned out his heartbeat. He remembered the way the walls had seemed to close in, the alley tightening, swallowing all while he froze. The panic had made the world tilt. He had tasted iron. A 3-pointer had crashed down nearby, the concrete beneath him erupting into fragments. The sound had been deafening sharp enough to break thought itself. Shattered ground, flying debris, the open sky spinning above him, every direction felt wrong, unsafe, deadly. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't run. And the 0-pointer. That thing had nearly crushed him into the pavement. It was too big, too loud, too everything. A titan moving with the force of inevitability. No matter where he looked, there was no safe place to stand. Nowhere to hide. Nowhere to be. And through it all, he had done nothing. No rescues. No victories. Not even a scratch on a machine. 0 points. 0. Bakugu was right. He was useless. A Deku. And as he stood there, trembling in his room, the air began to thin around him. His ribs tightened inward, a cold pressure wrapping around his chest like invisible hands. That same crushing sensation, the same one he'd felt at the exam gate, drowning in the noise of the crowd. The same one in that alley, trapped between metal and concrete. The same one under the open sky, where every direction felt like danger. The panic hit like a memory with teeth. Sharp. Fast. Unavoidable. He felt small again, pathetically, impossibly small, a single point lost in a world far too big to care that he existed. The exam hadn't just proved he wasn't a hero. It had revealed something far worse, that there was no place built for him. Not in crowds that swallowed him whole, people packed shoulder to shoulder, all of them louder, faster, stronger, every one of them armed with quirks that made his body feel like paper waiting to tear. Not in open spaces that made his skin crawl, vast arenas, city blocks, empty streets where anything could come from anywhere, where even a stranger walking past him on the sidewalk possessed more firepower than he could ever dream of. Not under a sky that felt too wide, too empty, too capable of crushing him without even trying, a ceiling so far above him that anything could drop out of it at any moment and erase him. The world wasn't just big. It was dangerous in ways he could never hope to match. Every open street felt like a trap. Every crowd felt like a stampede waiting for the weakest one to trip. Every sky felt like a mouth ready to swallow whoever couldn't keep up. And Izuku had learned painfully, brutally in 1 hour exactly where he stood in this world. At the bottom. The smallest target. The weakest link. The thing that breaks first when everyone else is already running ahead. It hadn't just bruised his pride, what little was left of it. It had carved a truth into him like a scar. This world, a world of heroes and villains and civilians with superpowers, wasn't made for boys like him. He was prey in a city full of predators, just an easy target. A mistake trying to survive in a place that had already decided he wouldn't. Even now, a week later, he could still feel it. The afterimage of metal claws scraping across the walls of his mind. Their echo rattling inside his skull whenever the world felt too close. Or too open. Or simply too much. He couldn't understand how he'd been so foolish for so long. How he'd lived his whole life believing effort could outrun reality. How it had taken staring his weakness in the face. Brutal, undeniable, public. Before he finally saw the truth. He should have known the day his mother apologized for him being born without a quirk. That had been the sign, hadn't it? The moment the world laid itself bare. She'd cried, and he'd smiled. And neither of them had said what they were really thinking. That this was something he couldn't fix? Something she couldn't protect him from? Something everyone else had already accepted long before he had. But he hadn't seen it. He'd kept dreaming, kept believing like an idiot. Kept pretending that wanting something badly enough made him worthy of it. His lips tasted like copper and salt. Chapped, cracked, raw from too many nights spent awake and afraid. Without thinking, his teeth worried at the broken edges. The nervous habit he'd never been able to stop. His eyes burned. Not with tears more at first. With heat, shame, the sting of holding everything in until his throat closed. Then the tears came again. Not the quiet kind. Not the kind you can hide. They were the heavy, ugly ones. The kind that stole breath and made the world blur. The kind that left his face stinging and hot. The kind that tasted like old hurt and new hopelessness. His vision smeared, streaked with the mixture of tears and the raw ache around his eyes. He pressed his palms hard into his sockets until stars burst behind them. The pressure hurt. But not enough. The ache inside him was too deep, too sharp, too heavy to be drowned out. A sound slipped out of him. Broken, trembling, almost voiceless. Half sob. Half gasp. Entirely defeated. He was pathetic. Useless. A failure. And yet? Why had his mom looked relieved when he came home in tears? Why had she let out that long, shaking sigh when he showed her the letter? Dear Izuku Midoriya, we have sent you this letter to inform you that you failed to achieve any notable points during the hero exam's physical test. However, your paper scores were exceptional enough to place you in Class 1C. We at UA look forward to having you this year. She had nearly burst into tears of joy. He couldn't even be angry at her. She had spent years worrying. Worrying that he'd break. Worrying that he'd push too hard. Worrying that he would throw himself into danger because he didn't know any other way to feel worth something. And when he failed the exam, when reality finally caught up to him, it wasn't disappointment she felt. It was relief. Relief that her son wouldn't die chasing a dream never meant for him. Relief that he wasn't going to run headfirst into a world built to crush boys like him. And that, somehow, hurt more than anything else. He wasn't sure how long he sat there. Time dissolved. Breath came in jagged stutters. Tears, snot, and the metallic taste of cracked lips bled together an ugly, wet mess of every emotion he'd spent years pretending he didn't feel. Because it had all been an act, hadn't it? The smiles. The notebooks. The certainty that he could make it work if he just tried hard enough. The unshakable dream. All of it. The bravado of thinking he could matter. That he could be something. Had always been foolish. His phone buzzed once. Then again. Again. Until the silence between each vibration felt louder than the phone ever could. He peeled his hands from his face, palms slick, fingers trembling. The phone unlocked automatically, lighting his face in cold blue. Dozens of notifications rolled in. Leaked hero school rankings. Exam results. Record-breaking headlines. UA exam record shattered. 503 points in a single physical test. He didn't click. Didn't care. Just swiped them away, drowning in a world that kept moving without him. Then her message. Mom. A picture of Katsudon glowing under the fridge light. A small smiley face. A line of text, warm in a way he didn't deserve. I know you haven't been eating since the exam, so I made Katsudon again. I hope you'll come eat it. I'm pulling a double at the hospital tonight. I'll see you in the morning, dear. He stared at it until the screen dimmed and went dark again. He didn't reply. Silence settled back over the room, thick and familiar. When he finally looked at the clock, it read 6 p.m. Another day gone. He wondered if his mom had set the alarm deliberately just to make sure he woke up. Just to confirm her son was still breathing. The thought twisted something bitter and fragile in his chest. He stood. Or tried to. His knees shook. Nausea punched through him, enough to make the world tilt sideways. He caught himself on the desk, gripping hard until the tremor passed. Then he moved. A hoodie from the floor, All Might's colors faded from too many washes. A pair of shorts. Sandals. Just enough to look alive. Just enough to walk out the door without making a sound. He hesitated at the threshold, half turning toward his bed. His phone still lay there, face down and silent. For a moment, he thought about grabbing it, a reflex, a habit, but the thought washed away as quickly as it came. He didn't care if it died. He didn't care if he did either. Who would he even talk to? His mother? She was working. Bakugu? Not in a million years. Anyone else? He couldn't even imagine their faces. He just needed air. Maybe for a few minutes. Maybe for longer. He stepped into the bathroom and opened the cabinet beneath the sink. A box hidden behind folded towels waited for him. He didn't think. He just grabbed it and slid it into his hoodie pocket. The hoodie's fabric was soft inside, familiar against his skin. Too bright on the outside, too loud, too heroic, but the warmth seeped into him, easing a tiny corner of the ache in his chest. Not much. Just enough to move. Just enough to keep walking. Only a little. The apartment door clicked shut behind him, the sound too loud in the still evening. It echoed down the hallway, then died. Outside, the February air bit into him immediately. Sharp. Thin. Like stepping into a world made of knives. He tugged the hood over his head and kept his eyes down because the sky felt too open, too wide, like it might collapse on him at any second. Like the zero-pointer all over again. He tried to swallow, but he had no saliva to do so, too dry, almost painfully so. He kept close to the buildings, shoulders brushing brick and metal as he walked. The middle of the sidewalk felt too exposed. Too vulnerable. Like something could come from behind him, or the street, or the sky. His breath fogged the air, ragged and uneven. Muzutafu was quiet at this hour, a stretched thin, uneasy quiet that made everything louder, the hum of streetlights, the distant rush of traffic, the soft scrape of his own sandals on pavement. He passed a driveway scattered with toys, a plastic hero lying face down in the dirt, cape snapped off. A ball left abandoned in the gutter. Then the chalk drawings. Bright scribbles across the concrete. Smiling heroes, crude lines, messy colors. All Might's grin smeared into a hazy blur by the wind. Izuku slowed. Something pulled at him, something small and painful. Beside All Might, a child had drawn another figure. Shorter, uneven, one arm missing. The chalk line across its chest had cracked with the pavement, splitting it clean in half. He stared down at it. The open street suddenly felt too wide again. The houses were too far apart. The overcast sky above, with thin light trickling through the cracking clouds, felt too expansive. The wind stirred again, and the drawing's dust scattered across the concrete. Gone. His pulse kicked up, a tight flutter beneath his ribs. He forced a breath in too fast, too shallow, and stepped away from the drawing. He didn't look back. But every step after that felt like the ground might vanish beneath him at any second. Like he was walking through the same exam arena all over again, sky overhead, empty streets stretching endlessly, and nowhere safe to stand. He blinked. He kept walking. The fog set in, he didn't notice. The neighborhood blurred around him, rows of quiet houses, identical silhouettes against the dimming sky. Warm windows, warm rooms, warm lives. All glowing softly behind curtains. All unreachable. Every lit window felt like a reminder. People like them lived there. People who belonged. People who had quirks, futures, friends, and reasons. People whose names mattered to more than two people in this entire world. People who were greeted with love, who were wanted every day, simply for existing. Not boys wandering the street with empty stomachs and heavier thoughts. Not boys with no power, no circle of friends, no place carved out in the grand machinery of their society. Not boys like him. He shoved his hands deeper into the hoodie pocket. His fingers brushed the cold metal edge of the box inside, pressing into his knuckles through the thin fabric. A tiny, sharp reminder of the choice he'd tucked away. A weight he carried like a secret promise. He didn't take it out. Couldn't. Not yet. His thoughts looped in their ruined, dead orbit. You should have trained harder. You should have stopped dreaming. You should have been born different. The words pulsed with each heartbeat, a rhythm he couldn't silence, the same cadence that had echoed through him since that exam. He didn't notice the fog swallowing the street behind him. At first, it was nothing, just a smear of pale haze pooled near the gutters, clinging to the pavement like leftover breath from winter. But step by step, it grew thicker. Heavier. Moving in a slow tide that didn't quite match the night air. It spilled out of alleyways as if poured from a hidden jug, smooth and deliberate. It collected under lampposts until the light looked like it was drowning. It curled around the edges of houses, swallowing their sharp outlines in soft, creeping bites. It didn't feel natural. And when he finally noticed it, really noticed it, it felt like it had crept up too quickly. A shiver went through him. Fog wasn't supposed to move like that. Not like something choosing where to settle. Not like something slinking through the air with intention. Not like something following. He stopped walking. Just for a moment. But the fog didn't. It kept swelling forward, quiet and patient, bleaching the world of color as it came. And Izuku kept walking, because stopping felt worse. The hum of the city dimmed within the fog. Power lines faded. Car engines disappeared into silence. Even the sounds of families behind windows dissolved into nothing. Only the wind remained, whispering from too far away to belong to Muzutafu at all. He stopped at the edge of the small park. The swings creaked somewhere in the dark, the metal chains rattling even though the air was still. A cold breath slipped between the trees. Not strong, just enough to tug his hood back a fraction. He looked up. The crescent moon hung between the branches, thin, sharp, pale. Barely alive even through the compact clouds in the sky. And for a single, unnerving heartbeat? It felt too close. Not brighter. Not larger. Just watching. He blinked hard. The feeling vanished. A hollow laugh scraped out of him, thin as paper. It wasn't humor, just a sound to break the emptiness pushing against his ears. The streetlights ahead shimmered strangely. Their shadows stretched too far across the pavement, long, thin smears bleeding into the fog like ink in water. He told himself it was exhaustion. Just exhaustion. Just the cold. But his hands were shaking again. Maybe from the air. Maybe from the thoughts he'd been trying not to think. Maybe from the creeping pressure at the edge of his mind, the same pressure he felt in crowds or under open sky. The fog pressed closer around him, rolling low and heavy, swallowing the streetlight halos until they were nothing but drowning circles of white. He walked anyway. His mind drifted. Thoughts turning sluggish and heavy, too slow to hold together. Every inhale scraped his throat, every exhale rattled from him like he had to remember how to breathe. He knew what was happening. The lack of food. The sleepless nights. The months of stress coiled tighter and tighter in his ribs. His body was running on fumes on hope that had already burned out. And that was why he was coming all the way out here. Right? He wasn't even sure when out here began. He recognized the park. The chipped benches. The swing missing a chain. The old vending machine humming near the bathrooms, its light flickering like it was always 2 seconds from dying. That had been the halfway point. But the ground under him now was soft grass crunching under frost. The cold smell of dirt replaced the concrete. Branches arched overhead, skeletal and black against the sky. He had left the park without noticing. But he still knew this place. His feet knew it better than his mind did. The forest trail. The creek. The fallen tree crossing. The secret world he and Katsuki once shared, back when they were still friends, back when the forest felt massive and magical, not suffocating and wrong. Back before everything went sideways. He kept walking. Because he didn't know how to stop. And the fog followed him deeper. The fog thickened until even his breath disappeared into it. Cold clung to his skin, curled into his sleeves, and settled in his lungs like frost. And then a shape. Small. Low to the ground. Moving. Izuku froze, thinking it was another trick of his starving mind, a drifting shadow, a dark patch in the mist. But it shifted again, padding softly through the frost as though it weighed nothing at all. A cat. He nearly stepped on its tail. It stared up at him with wide, unblinking eyes gray as wet stone. Its fur was black, but every hair was tipped white, as though frost had settled over it and never melted. A red collar hung loosely around its neck, the silver bell attached to it swaying gently. Silently. No jingle. No purr. No hiss. Just the distant rush of water, muffled by the fog. For a moment, he thought of the strays behind his school, the ones he used to feed until they'd learned to trust him. Those cats always ran at the first sound, first step, first breath. This one didn't run. Didn't flinch. Didn't blink. "Hey there," he whispered, voice ragged and thin. The cat blinked once. Slowly. Deliberate, as if it were acknowledging him. Izuku stepped closer. The fog shifted around them. The forest behind had disappeared into the fog. The street behind, even that felt like a world away. No lamps, just trees. No houses, just fog. No electric hum, just the faint murmur of moving water ahead. A prickle climbed the back of his neck. His mind whispered that this wasn't right, that he should turn back, that something was off in a way he couldn't name. That he was making a mistake. That nothing would change. That he should just go back to his room and rot away. But he didn't turn back. He knew the signs well enough. Lack of food. Not enough sleep. Too many nights reliving the exam in his dreams. Too many days pretending he wasn't drowning in everything he was. Reality slipped in moments like this. Edges blurred. Shadows felt too real. This was just another fracture. Just another place where his mind dipped out from under him. And yet he still wanted to see it. To be there. One last time. The bridge. The memory. The place where things had made sense once, before everything went wrong. The cat turned, tail drifting behind it like smoke. It padded forward through the frost. And Izuku followed. 1 foot. Then the other. Into the mist. Into the quiet. Into a memory waiting for him in the dark. The forest deepened and grew thicker as the fog became a darker curtain, pale turned dark gray that stretched like an ocean between black trees. The air carried the sound of water, louder now, steady, the low voice of the creek speaking beneath everything. His footsteps grew quieter. Each one felt heavier, as though the ground didn't want him anymore. Then the trees opened into a clearing. The creek lay before him, narrow and glassy, winter thin. Moonlight cut through the fog in one sharp beam, turning the surface into liquid silver. The cat was gone. Not a sound. Not a flicker. Just gone, erased as cleanly as chalk from a board. Izuku stepped closer to the water's edge, drawn by something dull and instinctive. The mist swirled around his ankles, cool, damp, smelling of stone and old soil. He leaned forward over the moving water. Moonlight caught his reflection, or the outline of one. Pale skin. Dark hair sticking to his forehead. Hollow green eyes rimmed in red. The rest of him was lost in the black behind him, the fog swallowing everything except the parts he wished he didn't recognize. He blinked. When had it started raining? He couldn't remember the first drop. He just felt wetness on his cheeks, cold, unfamiliar. Rain. Or tears. He couldn't tell the difference. He blinked once, and another bead of water slid across his skin. Thin, sharp droplets pricked at him one by one. Maybe it had been the mist all along, condensing into cold needles that pierced straight through his hoodie and into his bones. The air itself seemed to sting. Clean. Clinical. Cruel. He didn't flinch. Didn't lift his hood higher. Didn't try to shield himself. He accepted it. The cold crawled down his spine, soaking into his clothes until everything felt heavy, weighted. His stomach clenched in a brief, instinctive protest, a reminder that he was still a person, still a body, but the feeling dulled, swallowed by the same numbness that had lived in him for months. Without thinking, his hand slipped into the kangaroo pocket of the hoodie. The metal container waited there. Frost bit into his fingertips the moment he touched it. A sharp, electric cold that seeped into his skin. His fingers paled instantly, veins rising in faint blue ridges beneath the surface. The corners of the box felt sharper than they should have been, as if the cold had honed them. He held it, caught between the urge to open it and the urge to throw it into the creek and watch it disappear. Then he let go. It fell back into the pocket with a muted clink. He exhaled. The breath left him white and thin, like smoke. He looked up. The moon had shifted, no longer a delicate crescent balancing on the horizon. It sat higher now, cutting cleanly through the clouds in a pale arc of light. Had it been hours? He'd left at 6. It couldn't have been that long. But the moon didn't lie. The world did. He turned his head, scanning the treeline. The fog had thickened, curling low around the roots and stumps, coiling upward like slow breath. The forest felt older now, heavier, as if it remembered something he didn't. As if it held memories he had lost. And there, across the creek, he saw it. The fallen tree. Half-eaten by moss, bark slick with age and winter damp. The bridge they'd sworn they built together, he and Bakugu, when they were too young to know that discovering something wasn't the same as creating it. Back when the world wasn't hostile. Back when dreams weren't heavy. Back when apologies weren't needed. He took a step forward. Then another. The wet grass gave way beneath him, turning into mud, slick, uneven, skiing at his sandals. Even the sound of his footsteps felt wrong. Too soft. Too distant. As if they belonged to someone farther away. When he reached the trunk, he paused. The moment stretched. Thin. Quiet. Fragile enough to break with a single breath. A mound of earth clung to one side of the trunk, split by 1,000 pinprick holes. An anthill, massive, intricate, alive. Black bodies crawled in and out of the tunnels in restless waves. In the dark, he could barely see them, but he could hear them. A faint, papery crackle. Like rain on glass. Like static. Like hunger. He crouched without meaning to, watching. Their movement was hypnotic. Purposeful. He swallowed the sound, too loud in the stillness. Then the rain thickened. It hissed against the creek, striking hard enough to turn the surface milky. The moon's reflection blurred, then shattered entirely. For an instant, it looked like the water wasn't flowing forward at all but curling back on itself, crawling upstream like a living thing. Izuku blinked. Hard. And it was just water again. Just rain. Just him, standing on the edge of an old childhood landmark with no childhood left in him. The cold drove deeper, threading into his bones, gnawing at the last warmth he had. The fog pressed close, climbing up the banks, wrapping around the roots. The world dimmed until all that remained was breath, rain, and a low, dull hum of something waiting for him to make the next move. The bridge groaned when he stepped onto it. Wet bark flexed under his weight, the sound hollow, old, aching. He reached out without thinking, fingers brushing the rough wood as he tried to balance himself. Every motion felt deliberate. Heavy. Final. The creek whispered beneath him, a soft, steady sound, like a lullaby meant for someone who'd long since stopped listening to lullabies. His shoe slipped once on the moss-glossed surface. He caught himself on instinct, breath catching in a small, dry laugh that wasn't laughter at all. So this was it. Not a decision spoken. Not a moment of clarity. Just an exhausted understanding that nothing he could ever do would change anything, not where it mattered. He crossed. Fog swallowed him to the knees. The moon hung directly above, split into shards across the restless water below. His breath came in soft, unsteady pulses. When he reached the far bank, his legs gave out. He sank heavily against the fallen tree, spine sliding into the shallow dip he had once called his throne. His command chair. His fortress. His safe zone. Back when the world was small and soft, when battles were fought with sticks and laughter, when the biggest danger was slipping on wet leaves. The throne felt smaller now, painfully so. Either he had grown, or the world had simply shown him how little of it had ever belonged to him. His feet dangled over the edge, sandals half submerged in the creek's frigid current. The water lapped gently against them, creeping higher with each pass, numbing the little sensation he still had. And yet, warmth bloomed faintly in his chest. A strange, unwelcome comfort. A quiet ache that said, at least this is something you can control. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the box. Metal stung his fingers. Cold enough to bite. Cold enough to ground. He held it close, thumb tracing the dent in the lid, the small, crescent-shaped mark left from when he dropped it months ago. Anger? Fear? He couldn't remember. He couldn't remember much of anything anymore. But he remembered this box. And he remembered why he'd brought it. A shaky breath escaped him as he opened the lid. A breath so thin it barely disturbed the air. Inside, a scatter of pills, painkillers, sleep aids, whatever he'd quietly collected from half-emptied bottles over the past year. A small razor, still sealed in its paper wrapper. And one card. The All Might Collector's Edition card. Silver Age costume. Golden border. Pulse Ultra Foil Edition. Limited release. Perfect condition, or once was. It was the same one he and Kaken had pulled that one summer, just kids, sweaty from running around, faces flushed with excitement. He remembered the sound they made when they saw it. That shared, shocked whoop. That celebration was too big for their tiny bodies. That argument about who would get to keep it ended with a compromise that neither of them stuck to. Or would have been able to. But just then, in the second pack Kaken opened, another had appeared, like fate had wanted them both to have one. Izuku had kept the first. He stared at the card now. The edges had yellowed slightly, worn from years in plastic sleeves and nervous fingers. But the image. That smile. It was still there. All Might's grin was endless. Invincible. A promise he'd tried to build his entire life around. A promise he could never reach. His fingers shook as he set the box down beside him. He plucked one pill between his fingers, pressed it to his tongue, and swallowed dry. The taste was bitter chalk dust and regret. He took another. Then another. They scraped down his throat one by one, leaving a trail of heat behind. Rain slid into his hair and across his lashes, thin trails running down his cheeks like something kinder than tears. Something he didn't have to make himself. He didn't feel cold anymore. Just heavy. Hollow. Numb in a way that felt earned. His gaze returned to the card. The edges curled as the rain soaked in. The paper softened. Ink bled, smearing across All Might's grin until it looked warped. Like the hero was crying, too. Or maybe screaming. Izuku gave a quiet, broken smile. Guess you finally gave up on me, huh? Another drop hit the card. Then another. It shriveled slowly, the image dissolving grain by grain. He let it fall from his fingers. It fluttered downward slow, almost graceful before sliding into the creek with barely a ripple. The current caught it instantly, pulling the remains under the fog until it vanished completely. Izuku took another handful of pills. He didn't count. Didn't try to. He swallowed them all at once, throat tightening, stomach twisting. The warmth spread faster now, rising through his chest like a tide. Then he took the rest. The box slipped from his numb fingers and clattered weakly against the fallen trunk, empty now except for the razor. The sound lingered for a heartbeat, suspended between rain and breath, then the creek swallowed it. He leaned back, letting the rain whisper across his skin like static. Moonlight spilled thin and pale through the fog, turning everything silver and flat, as though the world itself were fading around him. His pulse thudded faintly in his ears, slow, uncertain, as if it were trying to decide whether it still belonged to him at all. The mist pressed closer. The forest, the bridge, the sky all blurred into one trembling gray smear. Nothing held shape anymore. He closed his eyes and waited. The medicine did its work, slow and heavy. His fingers had gone numb long ago, his toes following soon after. The ache that had lived behind his ribs for nearly a year finally began to loosen. For the first time in months, maybe even years, he didn't feel like he was fighting to stay inside his own body. A long breath left him, half sigh, half prayer. The creek murmured below, a soft, endless bubbling sound. Somewhere downstream, a fish broke the surface with a faint splash. The sound was so gentle it almost felt staged, like the world was pretending to still be alive for his sake. When he opened his eyes again, the water was black glass. It caught the light of the moon in thin, rippling seams, reflections sliding across the surface like veins of silver. He reached toward the box without thinking, fingertips brushing the remaining object inside. The packaging peeled away beneath the rain, flimsy and dissolving. The metal beneath was smooth, cold enough to burn. He stared at it for a long time. Long enough for the rain to trace down the blade, long enough for the cold to creep from his palm into his veins. It reminded him of being a kid again, back when he used to draw lines on his arms with markers, pretending they were scars from battles he hadn't fought yet. He used to color them in red. Said they made him look like a hero. Now the same lines burned beneath his skin for real, but there was no color, no imagination, just a slow resistance, a numb sting that crawled upward until it reached his chest. It should have hurt. It didn't. The ache that bloomed there wasn't pain, it was heavier than that. It was the weight of every small failure that had piled up until it hollowed him out from the inside. A single thought surfaced through the fog. Fragile. Unwelcome. Don't fail again. He almost laughed at this last echo of the boy who still thought effort mattered, who still believed he could pass or fail at being alive. It was absurd. Cruel, even. Success, failure, did any of it mean anything when the world had already decided which one he was? The cold sank deeper. His fingers trembled, bone blue and unsteady. The metal slipped, almost gently, like it had been waiting for permission. It fell. A faint sound, barely their metal on water, a quiet note swallowed by the creek. Ripples bloomed and died under the rain, silver for a heartbeat before fading into black. He watched the ripples fade until the creek turned to glass again. Still. Perfect. As if the world had drawn a breath and refused to release it. Then the quiet broke, his wonderful, endless quiet. Something inside him clenched painfully, like every muscle inside clenched at once. The breath was knocked out of him in an instant. A heat bloomed beneath his ribs, too sudden to understand. It raced outward, every nerve catching fire and then freezing in the same heartbeat. The log shifted beneath him. His hands refused to listen. Everything refused to listen. The forest tilted. The sky pressed down like it was falling. Sound thickened until even his pulse came as thunder inside his skull. He tried to breathe and felt the air recoil. His vision fractured. The trees leaned at impossible angles, their outlines bending like metal under weight. The water below shimmered wrong, shapes sliding across its skin that weren't reflections anymore. For an instant, he thought he saw color moving in the black veins of light threading through the current, pulsing in rhythm with the thing hammering in his chest. The warmth flared once more just as he caught his breath, attempting to lean back into his throne. It was cruel and bright, flooding through his arms, his throat, his head. His body flexed once more, his head slammed against the wood, a painful crack, dots filled his vision where others hadn't yet claimed. The world folded inward, gravity becoming a hand that dragged everything down. Rain, fog, breath, thought swallowed in one motion. There was a loss of balance, the rush of sound, and the final sense of falling without end. He had fallen from his throne, his body flailed without his consent. A shock of cold, his head breaching into the black waters, his eyes unable to close as his skull hit the creek and everything went black. And somewhere within that moment of final thought, beneath the panic and the fading heartbeat, a single spark refused to die. It crawled through him unseen, burning through the emptiness he'd built, stitching itself into every cell it could find. The darkness closed over him, but a single, fearful, greedy desire somehow survived. Izuku stared upward at the endless expanse that loomed above him like a cruel giant. A sky without stars, just a ceiling of shifting gray, rippling like the surface of deep water. His back throbbed from the fall. He had fallen from near the top again, from somewhere he could never quite see. The pain wasn't sharp anymore, only heavy, a reminder that he still existed here, somehow. Here. Again. The thought felt both alien and NTMT. He knew this place. He had lived this dream 1,000 times, yet never remembered it when he woke. The ground beneath him wasn't ground at all, only a field of jagged stone that rose in an impossible slope, vanishing into the dark above. Far beyond sight, faint shapes moved, climbers, or echoes, or the ghosts of his own failed attempts. He sat up slowly. His breath came out as vapor, pale and sluggish. The air was cold enough to sting, but there was no wind. The silence pressed close, the kind that seemed to listen back. He glanced down. The abyss stretched below, black and pulsing, swallowing what little light existed. For a moment, he thought he could hear it breathing. A shiver crawled up his neck. He hated this place. He had always hated it. The endless climb. The endless failure. But something was different this time. There was a warmth deep in his chest, small, erratic, alive. Not the warmth of comfort, but of friction, of something burning against the cold. It pulsed once, and the air rippled around him. He looked at his hands. Pale veins of faint silver light traced beneath the skin, flickering like distant lightning. When he flexed his fingers, the glow pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. He should have been afraid. Instead, a strange calm took hold. Above him, the stone tower groaned, as if aware of his awakening. The climb waited. Like it always would. Always had. And though he could not remember why he had fallen or how many times before his hands found the rock, and a perfect handhold, he began to climb. The stone was slick beneath his fingers, the cold cutting so deep it felt alive. Every breath scoured his throat like sandpaper. His hands bled where the rock bit through the skin, but he barely noticed. Pain and effort had long since blurred together. The wall hated him. That was how it felt each time he found a grip. The surface shifted, smoothing over, shivering like flesh pulling away from a wound. The mountain didn't want him. It wanted him to fall. He had seen this before. He didn't know how or when, but every motion was déjà vu, the vanish of a foothold, the sting of the air that wasn't air, the endless weight of failure pressing from above. He knew this punishment, this climb that never ended. Still, he climbed. His arms trembled, shoulders locking, nails scraping for purchase on the black stone. When he pulled, the wall flexed under him wet, almost breathing. A ripple of water flowed over his knuckles. His grip faltered, he nearly slipped, fingers screaming for friction that wasn't there. He threw himself upward instead, a desperate lurch that carried him onto a narrow ledge. His back hit the rock with a dull crack that echoed through the emptiness. He rolled once, coughing, spitting grit and something metallic that wasn't quite blood. The ground beneath him split. Hairline cracks webbed outward, light seeping through them in thin silver threads. From one fracture, a small white shard glimmered, a shape like bone or crystal. He reached for it. The moment his fingers brushed its surface, it shattered, crumbling into pale dust that melted into his skin. A sting shot up his arm, a pulse that felt both alien and familiar, like touching electricity for the first time. He didn't remember that. Didn't understand it. Didn't stop. He pushed himself to his feet, body shaking, drenched in cold. Each breath came shallow and wrong, as though the air had turned to water. He gasped, coughed, and a torrent spilled from his mouth, clear and endless, running down his chest and over his hands before vanishing into the stone. Panic flared. He lurched forward, clutching for another handhold, another chance not to drown in air that refused to feed him. His vision swam. The climb tilted. He forced his fingers into a new crack and pulled. The wall moved again, softened, hardened, alive. The mountain groaned beneath his weight, the sound a chorus of stone and water and breath. He kept going. Because he couldn't stop. Because he had already fallen once. Because he had fallen hundreds of times. Because even here, at the edge of everything, the thought of stillness terrified him more than the pain. Because if he didn't make it to the top this time, he doubted he'd wake up from this height. Time slipped. Pieces of the climb vanished. He would blink, and the wall below him was gone, the handholds different. He didn't remember crossing the gaps. He didn't remember breathing. His body did not stop. The noise of his own heartbeat was a hammer behind his eyes, dull and relentless. Each pulse made the world tremble, each breath dragged more of the cold inside. Water filled him lungs, throat, thoughts, but the motion of his arms never ceased. Then ground. His knees hit stone hard. An alcove flat, mercifully flat. He stayed there, folded over himself, convulsing with the rhythm of what used to be breath. Clear water, thick water, whatever it was, spilled from his mouth and vanished into the cracks. He crawled. The rock scraped the skin from his palms, leaving a trail that steamed faintly in the frozen air. Ahead lay a hollow, a shallow basin carved into the wall. A pool. Black and still. He didn't think. He only reached. Fingers broke the surface. The liquid clung to him, thick as oil, thin as mist, warm and cold at once. It ran up his wrists, leaving his skin shining. The texture was wrong, sandpaper and silk together, friction and glide. He lifted a handful. It gleamed faintly, reflecting nothing. It smelled like metal. It felt alive. His body shook. The sound that left him was half cough, half sob. The world tilted. Again, the edge of the alcove vanished from his sight. He fell forward. The black met him halfway, rushing up with impossible speed, swallowing light, swallowing thought. Then only the sound of water. Everywhere? Inside? Endless. And the faint sense of motion carrying him deeper. He crawled out of the black. The fluid clung to him like a living thing, stretching in long threads that refused to break. It coated his arms, his throat, his face slick, elastic, burning cold and hot at once. He could hardly see. When he tried to wipe it away, it smeared, a second skin that hissed against his eyes. He looked up. The wall rose forever into a sky the color of wet stone, and for the first time, there was an end so distant it should not have been visible. A white shape waited there, faint and sharp, like bone catching the light. A crown. And beneath it, a mask. Eyes hollow and black, watching. Then he was moving again. Climbing. He didn't remember standing. His hand simply found the stone. His body obeyed. Every motion sent a wave of wrongness through him. The weight in his chest sloshed as though he were carrying the sea inside. His arms burned from wrist to shoulder, the ache twisting into something electric, searing. The black film sank into his skin, threading through veins that pulsed too fast, too strong. He dragged himself higher. The air thickened, it felt like breathing through glass. Each inhale scraped, leaving behind a trail of cold that turned to heat, that turned to something else entirely. His muscles trembled, then locked, then surged forward again with a strength that wasn't his. Almost there. Almost. He looked at his hands. The skin was splitting, fine cracks veining outward like ice spreading across a lake. From them oozed not red, but a deeper shade of night. The liquid shimmered as it ran, clinging to the stone, writhing upward to rejoin the wall. The sight should have terrified him. It didn't. The black within him pulsed, answering the pulse outside, until he could no longer tell which belonged to whom. Each beat drew him closer to the top, closer to that watching crown. And somewhere in the rhythm of climb and breath and pulse, a realization surfaced. The mountain wasn't resisting him anymore. It was accepting him. The stone softened under his hands, reshaping itself to his grip. The black seeped from his skin into the wall, and the wall into him, until both were one continuous, shuddering motion. He reached the summit on shaking arms. The climb had stolen most of what he was: air, strength, memory, but his body had kept moving long after his mind began to fade. He hauled himself over the final ledge and collapsed onto cold stone, chest heaving, vision flickering in and out like a broken screen. He pushed up onto wobbling feet. The world above the climb was impossibly vast and impossibly small at the same time. A plateau of pale stone. A horizon of endless gray sky. And at the center, the figure. Impossibly tall one moment, human-sized the next. Cloaked in heavy, ancient robes. A mask smooth as carved bone clung to its face, crowned by a circlet of cold, white brilliance. It didn't move. It simply existed. And the world existed because of it. Izuku's breath hitched. The crowned figure tilted its head, as if examining a long-lost tool. Then, without crossing the distance, it was suddenly close. A blink, a heartbeat, a shift in reality. Its hand, smooth, warm, almost gentle, cupped his cheek. And the pain vanished. His lungs cleared. His vision sharpened. The weight of his body lifted until he felt almost lighter than air. The figure's touch held him still. Not with force, but with inevitability. Then the voice came. Not from the figure's mouth. Not from the sky or the stone. It came from everywhere. From the air, from the marrow in his bones, from the pulse fluttering in his throat. Many voices braided into one. Cold, royal, ancient, old as silence, new as sin. Like a form the devil could take to tempt any soul. The voices came as one. As wind, as stone, as pulse. Moving through him like a crown lowered onto a bowed head. No cost too great. No mercy without price. No flesh without burden. No heart without a chain. No will left unbroken. Each line pressed deeper, carving meaning into bone. You shall carry what others cast away. You shall bleed so others may stand. You shall save, and in saving, you shall drown. His veins flickered black. Then silver. Then black again. No mind to think. No will to break. No voice to cry suffering. Born of God and void. Born of marrow and memory. You shall seal the blinding light that plagues their dreams. The crowned figure's hand cupped his cheek, warm and impossibly steady. You are the vessel. You are the hollow knight. Rise, my hollow vessel. Rise, and remember nothing but the duty carved into your soul. The world seemed to tremble underfoot. Or maybe it was him. Then the voice shifted. Not softer, but deeper. Sinking into the places where memory and instinct entwined. No waking comes without answering. No stirring without an echo. No echo without those who remember. The shape of the first sound. The words drifted through him like dust in old light. You rise, and the thread trembles. Not the thread you recall? The thread that recalls you. A low hum spread beneath the stone. As if something far below had turned its head toward him. There are others who feel the pull. Some born of your quiet marrow. Some shaped by halls you have never seen. But which know your name. Izuku's heart stuttered. The figure's hand did not move. Kin wears many faces. Some share your blood. Some share the burden of being made. Some only the memory of kneeling. He didn't understand. But the words felt like remembering something once carved into him. The crown glimmered faintly. Light flickering like a dying star. When one rises, all that was bound stirs. When one breathes, the halls that kept their breath. Lean closer to listen. His knees buckled. He bowed. Not willingly. But because the world itself bent around the words. Some will come because the song is familiar. Some because the leash grows warm. Some because they wish to know which throne the tremor belongs to. The mask's hollow eyes glowed with distant fire. With recognition? With claim? With a warning. You call to them simply by existing. And they answer simply by being what they are. The final whisper curled around his soul like a brand. Endure, little one. Endure until the gathering begins. Endure until you learn. Which eyes watch with kinship. And which with appetite. Izuku exhaled. And the world folded. The stone dissolved. The sky dimmed. No pain. No sound. No air. Only the echo of that last whispered truth. And then nothing. Izuku woke up numb. Cold. Wet. Empty. He lay where he had surfaced, half dreaming, half alive, awareness dripping back into him by slow degrees. He couldn't tell what time it was morning, maybe? Only that the air carried the kind of chill that lives in dawn. Something moved nearby. A shape. Tall, thin. Watching. His vision blurred, caught the outline, and then it was gone, folded back into the fog or the trees or the edge of whatever this world was. Memory trickled in like an drip of thoughts he didn't remember making. Fragments. Noise. Pain. The climb. The crown. The voice. His body lagged behind his mind. He wanted to move, wanted to prove he still could, but no command reached his limbs. He twitched once, twice, then lay still again. The only thing that worked was breathing. And even that felt borrowed. He was thirsty. The air was too dry, the mud too damp. Around him, morning began in small sounds, birds somewhere distant, the hum of insects testing their voices in the cool light. He turned his head just enough to see his hand. Palm down in the mud, half buried. A perfect line of ants traced across his skin, organized, efficient, unbothered by the human beneath them. They crawled over his wrist, past his ear, and disappeared toward the fallen tree that stretched across the creek. Then it hit him. The memory. He had tried to kill himself. And failed. The realization didn't bring relief. Just confusion. How? He could still feel it, the involuntary spasms, the blood leaving him, the cold water swallowing everything he was. The crack of skull on stone. His fingers rose shakily to his forehead. Pain flickered like static. He found a scar just past his hairline, rough and old beneath his fingertips, as if it had healed years ago, not hours. He stared. Had he regenerated? His gaze dropped to his arms. Thin, dark lines marked where the wounds had been. The dried blood was black, not red, thick and matte, like oil baked into skin. The wrong color. A wrong texture. It clung when he touched it, but didn't smear. He swallowed hard. For a moment, he was back in that pit, the burning white light, the crown, the mask. The voice that had spoken through him rather than to him. He blinked, and the image dissolved into morning fog. Nothing about this made sense. The world looked normal. It didn't feel that way. He pushed himself up, every movement a tremor. The effort made his whole body shake, a feverish vibration that crawled through bone. Nausea rolled through him, he fell forward, face first into the mud. A spasm tore through his back, white-hot and blinding. He clenched his eyes shut and waited, counting the seconds until it passed. When he opened them again, the mud was gone. He wasn't sure when he had stood, or how, but his body was moving slow, unsteady steps, legs carrying him without permission. The pain was still there, but it had grown distant, like a sound heard underwater. His thoughts felt thick, syrupy, slipping from his grasp as fast as he could make them. He stumbled, knee cracking against a fallen log, but didn't register it until much later. His sandals were gone. He didn't remember losing them. He spat a mixture of mud and something thicker, darker, that tasted like rust. Then, without realizing how, he was out of the forest. Cold wind met him with the weight of reality. The trees gave way to open air, and the sudden emptiness stole the last of his balance. His knees folded. He hit the ground hard, soft grass cushioning the fall. The rain started again, small, sparse droplets pattering against his back. He tried to move. Couldn't. The world flickered. When his eyes opened again, white light flooded them. He was staring at the ceiling of an ambulance, then at fluorescent panels in a hospital room, then at shadows of people leaning over him, their words blurring into the hum of machines. Sedated, but his brain scans are off the charts. Warming quirks are helping, but his temperature's barely moved, 3 degrees up from 6 Celsius? Thankfully. But we don't know if he'll wake up. His heartbeat's almost inaudible. What do we tell Inko? Tell her it's going well. She's still in surgery. If she panics, that's 2 patients down. You tell her she's my boss. She's everyone's boss. I'm just trying to keep his blood above room temp. The voices cut off. A tall doctor with 4 arms and a clipboard froze mid-sentence. The woman beside him, red-haired and tired, holding Izuku's wrist between her fingers, followed his gaze. Both stared. That's impossible, she breathed. There's enough sedative in him to keep a hero under for days. Then increase the dose if he goes into shock, The rest dissolved into noise. The fluorescent lights melted into a white haze. And the dark took him again. He woke next, still cold, still exhausted. But no longer in the hospital. At least, not in any normal way he understood. His room had been reorganized. The 4 stand sat where his side table used to be, metal gleaming faintly in the morning light. A bushel of flowers rested on the shelf a few feet away, bright, hopeful colors that felt like they belonged in someone else's life. He blinked at them. Something about them felt distant. Wrong. Wait. He had been awake before this. He remembered his mother's voice wet with tears, trembling with fear and anger. He remembered being half carried home, the cold of the stretcher replaced by the warmth of her arms. He remembered the way she'd moved his furniture around to make space for the equipment, muttering through sobs, hands shaking, reprimanding him in between broken apologies. So why did it feel like he was remembering someone else's life? Why did it feel miles away? He looked up at the saline bag and winced. Empty. Completely drained. His mouth was dry enough to ache. A flicker of memory surfaced, the confused doctor explaining to his mother that Izuku's body was pulling fluid from the IVs at an unsustainable rate, as if something inside him was starved for moisture. 12 replacement packs were sent home with her. A pile of tubing and clamps, and instructions she had already known by heart. His mother's whispered, "Thank you," had cracked in the middle. He swallowed. His throat felt like paper. He reached to the right. His phone sat plugged in beside his bed, screen dark but warm. Fully charged. When he picked it up, a burst of vibrations rattled his hand. Notifications, hundreds of them rolled down. The screen like a waterfall. Missed calls. Unread messages. Dates. Times. He stared. It had been March 6th when. When it happened. When he fell. When everything ended and didn't. When he had made the decision that had changed nothing for the better. Today was March 12th. 6 days. 6 days he couldn't remember. No, not lost. Given away. Like something had taken those days from him as payment. Or as an offering. Or as the cost of returning. The thought settled in him like ice. Cold. Heavy. Unmoving. He pushed himself upright, bracing on the wall as the floor pitched under him. His balance was shot, completely gone, like his inner ear had been rewired in his sleep. His legs didn't obey properly. Every step was a stumble, a catch, a near fall. He staggered out of his room and into the hallway, one hand sliding along the wall to keep himself from collapsing outright. The nausea rode up his throat, thick and bitter, but he kept moving. He hit the bathroom doorframe with his shoulder before he managed to turn the knob and spill inside. He opened the shower door, almost tearing it from its track, and twisted the knobs until blistering hot water roared against the tile. Steam filled the small room immediately, curling around him. He peeled his shirt off, or tried to. The fabric clung to him, cold and wet, but he wrestled it over his head. Then he stopped. His reflection stared back at him, and it didn't look like someone who had been gone for 6 days. It looked like someone who had been dead for far longer. His skin was nearly white. Not sick white. Not pale. Bleached. Paper thin. Veins faintly visible beneath. His freckles stood out starkly, pitch dark, too sharp against the washed-out skin. His ribs jutted harshly. His eyes were sunken, framed by bruised dark rings. And his hair, what had once been green, was now a dull, greasy black with only faint edges of color left. It didn't look like neglect. It looked like something had drained the life out of him. He turned, ready to step into the shower, when a spot caught his eye. The mirror reflected a perfect black circle on the small of his back. Coin-sized. Too dark to be a mole. Too uniform to be a bruise. He froze. His breath hitched. He reached back. His fingers brushed the mark. The texture was wrong, raised, rough, like a scar that had healed badly. He had never seen it before. A cold pressure crawled up his spine. He pushed his damp hair aside. And stopped breathing altogether. Another one. Smaller. Dark. Just beneath his hairline. He touched it. The same roughness. The same wrong texture. He stared into the mirror, into his own face, searching for something normal to hold on to. Anything. His hair fell forward as he lowered his head, and that's when he saw them. His eyes. Hollow. Faded. A dark shade of green that looked drained, washed out, and empty. He didn't look sick. He didn't look injured. He didn't look alive. A cold thought moved through him, not dramatic, not supernatural, just painfully logical. Maybe he hadn't brought anything back from that creek. Maybe he had left something there. Something important. Something he couldn't name. He stared at himself until his vision blurred, until the steam swallowed him, until the only thing he could see clearly were those hollow green eyes staring back. Dead? Or close enough that the difference hardly mattered. He stepped into the shower. The steam wrapped around him in thick white ribbons, filling the air until it felt like he was breathing clouds. The water blasted down near boiling. He could see it rolling off his skin in violent currents, could hear it hissing against the tile. He should have flinched. He should have screamed. He had always hated showers this hot. Always. The heat used to make his skin ache, like every pore was being pried open at once. Sometimes he'd even jump out halfway through because it hurt too much. Now. Nothing. The water hit him like warm rain. Not even uncomfortable. Just mild. Soft. Barely there. A familiar anxiety curled low in his stomach, a quiet tightness that grew each second he stood beneath the spray. Something was wrong. Something in his body wasn't reacting. Something in him wasn't human enough to respond the way it should. He tried to ignore it. Tried to focus on the routine. Shampoo, fingers through his hair, rinse, repeat. Mundane motions in a world that suddenly felt foreign. But the mirror's image clung to him. That pale, skeletal boy. Those hollow green eyes. Those black marks he couldn't explain. And his mother. Crying in the car. Her hands shaking as she set up 4 bags in his room. Her voice cracking as she asked him why. The hot water blurred. His breathing hitched. His chest tightened. He pressed both hands to his face, water rushing down his arms in steaming sheets. His knees buckled, and he steadied himself on the tile wall, forehead pressed to the cool surface. A sob clawed up his throat. Raw, sudden, unstoppable. He bit it back. Failed. The breakdown wasn't explosive. It was quiet. Suffocating. Like something inside him finally cracked, and all the weight he had been carrying spilled out at once. He wasn't supposed to still be here. He wasn't supposed to wake up. He wasn't supposed to look in a mirror and see a stranger. And worst of all, his mother had seen him like this. Alive, but not really. Breathing, but barely. A son who had tried to leave her behind. He sank slowly, sliding along the tile until he was sitting under the water, arms wrapped around his ribs as if holding himself together by force. The room was filled with steam. The water roared on. And Izuku cried until his voice failed, until the heat no longer felt like anything at all, until the grief hollowed him as thoroughly as his reflection had. Nothing in the world had changed. Nothing looked different. Everything outside that bathroom door was still normal. But he wasn't. And he didn't know how to live in a world that hadn't broken with him. Thursday, March 13th, XX46, Midoriya Residence. Izuku Midoriya stepped out of the shower long after he should have. His skin felt tight-stretched, desiccated, like it had been wrapped around the wrong frame. Movements lagged behind intent. Still, better than before. Not good. Just less wrong. It was an improvement on how he had felt earlier, at least. The heat had helped. Letting the water run over him until his thoughts finally lined up in the right order, until his limbs remembered which signals belonged to him. That had been a challenge, just sitting there for what felt like forever in the heat that felt far too cold for what he had it on. Better, still wasn't the word he was looking for. Present? That fit? He had been conscious the whole time, but not there. Like he was piloting a plane with fogged glass, or trying to walk with crutches made of ice, or like he had been forcefully ripped from the controls of his body, but could still nudge them with his feet from a distance. His phone buzzed weakly in his hand as he grabbed it off the bed. Apparently, he'd tossed it there earlier without noticing. The screen lit up with an article. Hero rankings shift as new sidekick announced for Kamasuit A. Public divided. He scrolled past it. Another headline slid into view. Commission quietly reclassifies 5 mutant-type quirks as unstable, no statement given. Scroll. Viral footage, underground villain fight club discovered in Osaka, police deny cover-up. Scroll. Court of Quirks, ancient think tank from the first era might have been real after all. Click here to learn more. Scroll. Local middle school expands anti-bullying program after incident last semester, parents concerned. Scroll. New fitness routine promises awakening friendly body conditioning, is it legit or junk? Scroll. Quirk counseling centers overwhelmed after entrance exam season, is stress the trigger? Scroll. Notifications blurred past him, irrelevant, distant, noise without meaning. He scrolled again, ignoring the next headline entirely. And the next. And the next after that. Notification after notification slid away beneath his thumb, one by one, a week's worth of noise his unconscious mind had let pile up. No texts. No missed calls. Not even Bakugo, who absolutely would have mocked him for failing at killing himself if he'd known. Nothing. It didn't surprise him. It didn't even sting. He shivered and shut the phone off, clutching the hoodie around him like a blanket. It wasn't enough. He tucked the hoodie into his sweatpants, then balled the extra fabric of the sleeves into his fists in an attempt to trap what little heat he had left. The apartment felt like winter. A thin draft brushed up his spine, carrying the faint, lingering scent of burned-out candles, ghosts of melted wax drifting through the hall. His mom never kept the place this cold. But the thermostat on the wall glowed with the exact temperature she had always set it to. He clicked it up 3 degrees anyway. His bare feet hit the kitchen tile and stuck there. Ice cold. Unforgiving. The sting shot straight up his legs, and he grit his teeth against it, digging through the fridge for leftovers. Rice. Eggs. A bit of fish. Simple. Familiar. Something with enough substance to put weight back in the hollow beneath his ribs. Something that might help him feel less like a walking shell. It felt like days since he'd eaten. A week, technically. But time didn't feel right. It felt tilted. Wrong. He could still feel the metal box he'd lugged into the forest. Still feel the river's freezing water chewing through his bones. It felt like hours ago, not a full 7 days lost to unconsciousness. The stove ignited with a soft click-click whump. Blue fire bloomed upward in a neat column. The sharp tang of lit gas hit him instantly familiar, comforting. He remembered sitting at the kitchen island as a kid, swinging his legs, asking his mom about everything she cooked. Asking her to teach him the basics as soon as he could reach the stove top. Begging her to teach him how to make her favorite snacks. But the memories froze. Because Izuku froze. The flame pulsed in time with the vent cycle, steady and hypnotic. The dial read 425 degrees, but that didn't register properly. The fire didn't look hot. It looked warm. Warm in a way that didn't belong to flames. Warm in a way that whispered. Not dangerous. Not painful. Warm. A tremor rippled up his arms. He couldn't look away from the blue tongue of fire curling toward the empty skillet he'd meant to grab but never did. Heat shimmered in the air, rising steadily, but all he felt was warmth. Gentle. Inviting. Like something murmuring right under his skin, "You're cold. Come closer." His hand moved before he realized it. Fingers drifted toward the flame, hovering above it so close it should have scorched him raw. No pain. Not even a flinch. Just a rush. Like someone had poured heat directly into his veins, up his arm, straight into his chest, warm, heavy, soothing. And he couldn't make himself stop. It unfurled through him with a relief so sharp it almost made him dizzy, twisting and turning in slow, rotational pulses of shivering warmth. It felt good. So good. His palm drifted lower, closing the gap. Flesh nearing open flame. Skin about to touch fire. If he could just take all that heat and be in it forever, he could ignore everything else. Izuku? His mother's voice stabbed through the haze. Izuku jerked back violently. The container slipped from his hands, clattering onto the tile. It didn't spill, but the sound cracked through him like a gunshot. His heart hammered so hard it stole his breath. His fingers shook. For a second, he couldn't remember why he was in the kitchen at all. Why, he swallowed. The motion scraped like sandpaper. Yeah? His voice came out raw, rougher than he meant. He barely had time to shift the container back into his arms before his mom burst into the kitchen. Her eyes were blown wide, already glossy with tears, yet her jaw was set in a stern line. A paper bag dangled from her hand, its bottom saturated with grease, carrying a smell of salt and fried food that filled the room. Without a word, she swept the container from his hands with her quirk, the plastic lifting cleanly from his fingers. She popped the fridge open and set everything back inside in one smooth, practiced motion, the kind of motion people only use when they're running on fear and muscle memory. Then she stopped. She planted her feet, pressed a trembling hand to her chest, and looked at him like she was bracing for impact. "You and I, young man." Her voice cracked. Tears welled before she could blink them away. "We need to talk about what happened." The word "happened" barely left her throat. It came out small, thin, brittle enough to snap. "Look, Okasan." His face burned. Confusion, embarrassment, fear, regret, shame, every emotion surged all at once, but it felt like he was feeling them from 6 feet underwater. Muffled. Muted. What was wrong with him? Had the river killed something inside him? Was he broken in a new way? Worse than quirkless, worse than before? He needed to apologize. He needed to beg her forgiveness. He needed to say something. "I'm sorry." But he didn't finish. His mother crashed into him like a wave breaking on the shore. She wrapped him in a crushing hug, arms tight enough to ache, tight enough to say she was terrified to ever let him go again. She shook against him, burying her face in his shoulder. His shorter frame folded into hers, swallowed by her presence, her scent, her desperation. Her warmth flooded into him like hot water seeping into parched stone. "I'm so sorry, baby," she whispered, voice breaking apart. Izuku froze. His breath hitched, caught between guilt and a kind of relief that hurt to acknowledge. His hands hovered uncertainly at her sides, hovering like he wasn't sure he deserved to hold her back. Slowly, carefully, he let them settle against her back. Her tears soaked through his hoodie in warm patches that spread across the fabric, seeping inward until they reached his chilled skin. Every tremor of her body rattled against him, small, sharp convulsions like she was barely keeping herself together. Shame pooled low in his stomach, heavy and thick. Anger too, at himself, at the river, at whatever part of him had decided dying was easier than living. He wanted to cry, wanted to break, wanted to beg. But nothing found its place in his throat. Nothing could get past the raw, painfully tight lump lodged there. So he swallowed, and it hurt. They didn't move. They just clung to each other while the burner hissed beside them, flames still flaring, heat rising. The heat was so strong he could feel it tugging at him again. Pressing at his side. Brushing along the skin beneath his clothes. Curling around him like a gentle, welcoming hand. Just one more breath. One more taste of warmth. One more. Izuku's fingers twitched against his mother's back, the pull of heat stuttering through him, tempting, whispering. He squeezed his eyes shut. Not now. Not here. Not while his mother was shaking in his arms. Izuku shook his head, hard enough that his hair rustled. He dragged his focus back, tightening his arms around her. His mom's voice hiccuped wetly against his shoulder. I'm so sorry, Izuku. I should have been a better mother. Her words came out in a broken sob, barely legible through her tears. Izuku stiffened, but she didn't let him pull away. She held him tighter, fingers gripping the back of his hoodie like she was afraid he'd vanish if she loosened her hold. I should have taken more time off, she choked. I should have gotten you help. I should have gotten you anything to distract you when things got bad. I should have listened when you were little and so scared, and I thought you'd grow out of it. I'm your mother. I'm supposed to protect you. Her breath hitched, sharp and broken. I wasn't paying close enough attention to your dreams. I know that now. I should have done more. I should have seen how lonely you were getting. I should have realized how heavy everything was getting for you before it hurt you. Izuku swallowed hard. The words scraped on the way down. She kept going, voice shaking apart with each confession. You didn't fail, baby. I did. I should have been there. I should have supported you better. I should never have let you feel like hurting yourself was your only option. You deserved more. You deserved a mother who saw it coming. She pressed her forehead to his shoulder as if she could hide from the truth sitting between them. I'll be better. I swear to you, Izuku. I'll take more time off. I'll keep you home more if you need it. I'll get you enrolled in anything, school help, counseling, a hobby group, I don't care. I'll do it. I'll do whatever you need. I don't care if I have to fight the world's expectations myself. I won't let you slip through my fingers again. Her voice cracked into a whisper that sounded like a wound torn open. You're my whole world, sweetheart. I can't lose you. I won't. Not again. The words hit him like a blow. For a moment, Izuku felt like her arms were the only thing tethering him to the floor. Like gravity itself had inverted, and the only thing keeping him from drifting off the earth was the desperate way she held him. He swallowed hard. But even that felt wrong, distant, like he was watching someone else's throat work. His own felt tight, scraped raw from a year's worth of swallowed emotions. Okasan. His voice cracked on the second syllable, thin and frayed. It wasn't you. She stilled. Completely. Izuku pushed the words out before they evaporated, a trembling whisper that felt like it belonged to a stranger wearing his skin, emotion present but unreachable, trapped behind the glass pane separating him from himself. It was my fault. His breath hitched sharply. I'm the one who did it. I'm the one who decided to do something stupid. You didn't make me. You didn't. You didn't fail. I did. The second those words left his mouth, Inko went rigid. Then she pulled back just enough to see him clearly, her hands still on him, her eyes shining with red-ringed disbelief and something close to horror. No. The word snapped out of her, sharp, fierce, almost a snarl. Not anger at him, but fury on behalf of the part of him trying to self-destruct. Izuku stared, startled. She cupped his cheeks in both hands, holding his face steady. Her thumbs brushed tears he didn't even remember crying because he still didn't feel them. They slid down his skin like they belonged to someone else. Don't you ever say that about yourself. Her voice shook violently, but her hands didn't. Not one more time. Not even in your head. Do you understand? Ibiba. He tried to look down, but her hands followed, keeping his gaze locked to hers. No. Softer this time. But somehow even more devastating. You were hurting, she said. You were alone. And you were a child trying to carry pain no child should ever have to carry. Izuku's breath trembled. His shoulders jerked with the ghost of a sob he couldn't access. His chest clenched tight, too tight, like something inside him was trying to break through and couldn't. Inko wiped another tear from his jaw, one he hadn't noticed, one he hadn't felt. You are not at fault for suffering, Izuku. Do you hear me? Her forehead pressed to his, grounding him in warmth. You are not at fault for being overwhelmed. You are not at fault for breaking under pressure, no one should face alone. None of it was your fault. Izuku's fingers curled into the back of her sweater, nails digging into the fabric. His hands shook violently. Behind the numbness behind that thick glass barrier. Muting everything, he should have felt something twisted. Weak. Aching. Desperate. Like a hand clawing faintly at the inside of his chest, begging to be let out. But I tried. The words came out strangled, half sob, half whisper, as if his throat couldn't decide what shape pain should take. And I'm telling you, she breathed fierce, steady, unyielding, that makes you someone who needed help. Not someone to blame. Her hand slid down to his jaw, thumbs brushing the corners of his mouth in slow, grounding strokes that made his chest seize tight. You are my son, she said, her voice cracking entirely. And you don't get to carry this alone anymore. Not while I'm here. Not ever again. Izuku stared into his mother's eyes. And for the first time since waking up, something sharp and fragile cracked behind that pane of glass inside him. The emotions pressing at the edges of him, fear, guilt, grief surged, threatening to tear through and swallow him whole. But the disconnect still clung to him, thin but stubborn, like a sheet of glass between him and himself. A single millimeter of distance that kept everything muted. Kept him still. Kept him from falling apart. Just enough distance to see her. Really see her. The heavy, swollen bags under her eyes from crying instead of sleeping. The red line tracks carved down her cheeks. Her hair frizzed, unbrushed, knotted in places she'd missed. Clothes thrown on without care, mismatched and wrinkled. She never left the house like this. She must have barely made it through the last week. A sharp punch of shame clenched in his gut, not a full blow, not the overwhelming kind he expected, but a dull, twisting pressure. Like the emotion was sitting behind the glass with the rest, unable to fully reach him yet. He swallowed. Oh, okay, Izuku whispered. The word hurt. Not because it was wrong but because it felt like surrender. Giving up the idea that all of this was somehow his punishment to endure, that the fault lived on his shoulders alone. But she was his mother. And he didn't have the strength to fight the look in her eyes, not when they were cracked and exhausted and silently pleading for him to let her help. He drew a small, shaky breath. I'm sorry, he said again, barely above a whisper. I'm really sorry. He pulled her back into the hug, arms looping around her waist. She folded over him, instantly clutching him like a lifeline, like he was something fragile she'd nearly lost and wasn't willing to risk again. And that warmth. God, that warmth. It bled into him, slow and steady, slipping past the numb coldness that had been sitting in his chest since he woke. It crept into the hollow places. Climbed up his ribs. Pressed against that fragile pane of glass inside him. A hairline crack formed. Another. A spiderweb of fractures raced across the barrier. Then, the whole thing shattered. Everything hit at once. The grief. The terror. The memory of standing in the bathroom alone with nothing but his thoughts. The silence after he fell. The cold water. The crushing weight of his mother's voice calling for him in panic. A broken sound tore out of him, high, strangled, helpless. Izuku collapsed into her, not from weakness, but from the sheer force of everything finally breaking loose. His fingers twisted in the fabric of her shirt, nails digging deep, knuckles white with the need to hold on to something solid. Sobs ripped up his throat raw. Tears streamed hot and constant, soaking through her shoulder. His entire body trembled, shaking with the violent release of every emotion he'd been holding behind that glass. He couldn't stop. Couldn't slow it. Couldn't breathe through it. He could only cling to her and cry like the world had split open inside him. Because it had. And she held him through all of it. Held him softly, swaying gently, whispering soft things he couldn't make out over his own crying. She didn't let go. Not once. And for the first time since waking up, Izuku found himself able to cry like he was supposed to. Like a kid who had been hurting for far too long. Like someone finally being held together. Inko didn't rush him. She didn't hush him, didn't ask him to calm down, didn't even try to make him look at her. She just wrapped her arms fully around him, one hand sliding up to the back of his head, fingers threading gently through damp curls. She stroked his hair in slow, steady passes. Each one matched the rhythm of her breathing, deep, even, deliberate. A guide. A tether. I'm here, she whispered into his crown. It's okay, sweetheart. You're okay. His sobs shook harder at that, legs weak beneath him. She only held him closer, her cheek pressed into his hair. I've got you, baby. I've got you now. Her words were soft, frayed at the edges, but unwavering. No matter what you need, no matter what you want. I'm here. I'm staying. I'm not letting go again. I love you so much, Izuku. More than I know how to say. More than you could ever realize. Her hand continued its slow, soothing rhythm, stroking his hair, rubbing the back of his neck, grounding him with every pass. Little by little, his sobs softened. His breathing hiccuped instead of breaking. The shaking in his arms faded from violent tremors to small, uneven quivers. Inko didn't move until his legs stopped buckling. Even then, she kept her hands on him, one steadying his shoulder, the other brushing a thumb across his cheek to wipe away whatever tears still fell. Come on, she murmured gently. Let's sit down, okay? You need something warm in your stomach. Izuku nodded, small, exhausted, still trembling. She guided him by the hand toward the dining table, keeping close like she expected him to fall again. The greasy paper bag she'd brought earlier sat slumped at the center of the table, dark stains spreading through the bottom. She opened it carefully, as if it were something fragile, and unpacked the containers inside: fried chicken, tempura, a mountain of soft, salty fries, and 2 miso soups. Comfort food. The kind you get when you're too tired to cook but desperate to take care of someone. She set everything between them, pushing the larger portions toward him without comment. Izuku sat across from her, wiping his face with the sleeve of his hoodie, eyes still puffy, breath shaky but slowing. Inko sat gently, almost cautiously, as though afraid any sudden movement might spook him back into tears. Her own eyes were swollen, reddened, lashes clumped from drying tears, but when she looked at him, it was with nothing but gentle determination. "Eat with me," she asked. Softly. Izuku nodded again. His throat felt thick, raw, but he managed a small, hoarse, "okay." The room was quiet except for the soft crackle of the still-burning stove and the faint rustle of paper and plastic. It wasn't peace. Not yet. But it was calmer aftershocks instead of earthquakes. And they were facing them together. Izuku reached for the food slowly, fingers trembling as he opened a container of fries. Steam rose in a lazy curl, drifting across his face. The warmth brushed against his skin, gentle, inviting, and something inside him tugged. Just a flicker. A tiny echo of the stove flame's hypnotic pull, soft and coaxing. Warmth. Come closer. He blinked hard, forcing the sensation away, and lifted the fries to his mouth. Across from him, Inko picked up her chopsticks and mirrored his pace. Bite for bite. Chew for chew. She wasn't trying to rush him or pretend they were fine, she was matching him so he wouldn't feel alone. Her eyes never left him. Not in a suffocating way. In a memorizing way. Like she was trying to lock in every detail of him eating, breathing, existing, terrified that if she looked away, even for a second, something might steal him. Izuku's throat tightened. His jaw trembled. He forced himself to chew, tasting salt and grease and comfort he didn't deserve. Each bite made him feel better and worse at the same time, a little fuller, a little warmer, and somehow more guilty for both. He swallowed hard, blinking past a fresh sting of tears. Inko's gaze flickered upward, landing briefly on the small, dark spot at the center of his forehead, the mark he never remembered getting. Her brows pinched, just slightly, a question forming and dying on her lips in the same breath. Not now. It wasn't the moment. She knew. She saved the question for later. He managed a few more bites before the regret and shame got too thick in his chest. His chopsticks slowed. Stopped. He stared down at the food, appetite crumbling under the weight of everything he felt and didn't feel. Inko noticed immediately. Her hand brushed his wrist, soft but steady. "Izuku, sweetheart," she murmured, voice still raw from crying, "can you eat just a little more for me?" He swallowed again hard. He nodded. Not because he was hungry, though he was. Not because the warmth still tugged at him, though it did. But because she asked, and he didn't have the strength to refuse her, not after everything. He picked up another piece of food with trembling fingers and ate. Slowly. Quietly. With her matching him again, every movement a quiet vow. For a few minutes more, the room held nothing but soft chewing and the occasional shaky breath. Inko never stopped watching him, not with worry, not with fear, but with a helpless kind of tenderness that carved right into him, threatening to bring the sobs clawing back up his throat. He kept eating anyway. Just enough. For her. And she ate with him as if every synchronized bite was a promise she refused to let go of. For a while, they just sat there. The cheap paper containers emptied slowly between them, the grease cooling as the minutes slid past. Izuku kept eating until the rest of the food went cold, until his stomach felt stretched and heavy, until every swallow felt like another ounce of guilt sinking into him. His eyes stayed downcast the entire time. He only looked up when his mom gently asked him to. Every sound felt too loud. The scrape of chopsticks. The crinkle of paper. The soft hum of the refrigerator. Even his own heartbeat thudding against his ribs like it didn't know how to slow down. Everything inside him was too much. Too loud. Too big. When he finally couldn't force another bite past the knot in his throat, Inko only touched his hand, warm, grounding, and nodded. No pressure. No disappointment. Just soft understanding. She guided him to the couch with quiet hands on his shoulders, slow and steady like she was handling fragile glass that might shatter again if she wasn't gentle enough. She didn't ask if he wanted to watch something. She just turned on a rerun of one of the old hero shows he used to love as a kid, bright colors, dramatic music, familiar voices. The TV babbled in the background, but none of it registered. What he felt was her. His mom sat beside him and pulled him in without hesitation. One arm wrapped around his shoulders. Her other hand slid into his hair, combing through the curls in long, careful strokes. He leaned into her without meaning to. Or maybe because he couldn't stop himself. She draped a small throw blanket over both of them, tugging it up to his chin like she used to when he was small and feverish. The fabric was soft, warmed instantly by her body heat. Izuku breathed. Slow. Uneven. Shaky. But breathing. Her fingers moved through his hair again. And again. And again. Each slide smoothed something frayed inside him, even if only for a moment. His eyelids grew heavier with every pass. His body sagged further into her side, his weight settling against her like he'd finally lost the strength to hold himself upright. The warmth was lulling. Her heartbeat was steady. The blanket was soft. The world kept dimming around the edges. Izuku, she whispered when his head drooped. He tried to answer. Tried to force out a yeah, or even a hum. But only a small, broken exhale came out. She smiled a tiny, aching thing and kissed the top of his head. It's okay, she murmured. Just rest. I've got you. He managed the smallest nod against her shoulder, barely more than a twitch. The warmth seeped deeper. Behind his eyelids, the world flickered brief flashes of fire, of water, of darkness under the river's surface. But her hand in his hair kept him anchored just enough. His breathing slowed. His fingers, tangled weakly in her shirt, went slack. His head slipped a little lower onto her shoulder. And finally, after the longest, hardest day he'd ever lived, Izuku Midoriya drifted into sleep in his mother's arms. Quiet. Exhausted. Safe. For the first time in a very, very long time. The next day, Friday, March 14th, XX46, Midoriya residence. The soft beeping of his alarm dragged him out of sleep long before dawn had even considered rising. A sound he had woken to thousands of times. Something a part of him was content never to hear again. Before everything, this very early hour of the day would have been his favorite part of the morning. The quiet, so soft and low that it covers the world like a thin blanket. The cool air, a prelude to the varying temperatures of the day to come. The early hour that made him feel productive, disciplined like a hero. In training even without a quirk. He used to use this time to go on a run, lift the handful of second-hand weights he'd saved up for, scribble new ideas into one of his many hero journals. Study for tests far ahead of schedule for his classes, and on the small occasion, just enjoy the sunrise. This morning was different in many ways. Slower. He shivered the moment he pushed himself upright. His body felt stiff, bones too cold, and skin too tight. He stood in the middle of his room for what felt like forever, though when he blinked at the clock, it had only been a handful of seconds. His mind was made up. Or it had been made up. What happened last night, everything had been a call to action. A reminder. A warning. He couldn't do that to his mother again. He couldn't put that weight back on her shoulders. He needed to be better. And no cost was too great. Even if part of him, a small, quiet, ugly part, whispered that his suicide succeeding would have been simpler, easier, a relief, even that part knew the truth now. It would have been a waste. A waste of his mother's love. A waste of every day she spent trying. A waste of breath, blood, and her entire world. Izuku grabbed the stack of hero journals lined on his shelf, dozens of notebooks filled with dreams, analysis, strategies, and childish hope, and dumped them into the trash can next to his desk. The thud they made sounded final. Too final. His shoulders shook with repressed emotion. He dusted his hands off, as if that motion alone could get rid of the guilt, the shame, the pressure building behind his ribs. But the emotions didn't budge. They rose anyway, threatening to spill over in another sob. Too much. Just like last night. Too big, too loud, too all-consuming. He pressed a shaking hand to his forehead, trying to push the ache down to something reasonable. He had only ever had one person truly in his corner, his entire life. Not fully, not perfectly. She hadn't supported the hero dream, no, but she was still his mom. And he could forgive that. Hell, he should have known better than to believe in himself anyway. Quirkless. Weak. Useless. No potential for heroism. So stupid he was, like a mindless thing attempting something impossible. Not in this world. Likely not in any world. With a shivering sigh, half expecting to see his breath fog in the air, he reached for his school bag. He set it on the desk, took out the last surviving notebook, and tossed it into the trash can with the rest. It was a waste of time anyway. His voice sounded wrong. Hollow. Too flat, too empty to belong to someone alive. It didn't even allow the bone-deep suffering of giving up on all his dreams to escape. He stared at the trash can for a long moment. He didn't care. Not really. None of it mattered anymore. His will was broken. Only a few things mattered now. Making his mom happy. Making her proud. Easing the worry he had carved into her like a scar. Going to class. Finishing at the top. Becoming the first quirkless student to graduate from UA's general course, and then UA University, too. Not as a hero, he had been delusional to even dream of that, but as proof he wasn't entirely useless. And after that? Live just long enough to pay his debts to his mother, financial, emotional, everything. After that, he could fade. Quietly. Become a relic of the past. The world wouldn't miss him. His eyes flicked up to the clock. 2 hours until he had to leave. More than enough time for a shower. He grabbed his phone, hurried through the frigid hallway, and slipped into the bathroom. He cranked the shower heat all the way up until the pipes groaned. The steam hadn't even formed before he stripped out of his double layers of shirts and pants. He caught sight of himself in the mirror. The black dot on his forehead was gone mostly. In its place was smooth, pale skin. Not normal pale. Porcelain pale. Cold to the touch. Too cold. Human bodies didn't make skin like that. Did they? Weird, he muttered, because anything else felt too big. Too real. And anything too small felt improper. He turned, glancing over his shoulder at his back. Same freckles. Same pale tone. Dozens of small, star-like scars. Except, different. The freckles looked darker today, like tiny black holes dotted across his skin. Shadows instead of pigment. And all of them framed the near fist-sized black mark of rough skin at the small of his back. A mark that had not been that large yesterday. He brushed his fingertips along the edge of it. The texture was strange, calloused but soft, smooth but uneven. Unsettling. Wrong. Yet, something in him leaned toward it. Curious. Drawn. Almost comforted. Even through the numbness, something about the mark whispered at the back of his mind. He chose to ignore it. Worrying was pointless. He had things to do, school to get through, tasks to complete. Nothing he felt mattered in the face of that. He let out a clipped breath. Another shiver. The room, even with all its steam, felt even colder than before. Then a soft, buzzing pulse thrummed behind his eyes, perilously close to a headache, but never quite tipping into pain. Just pressure. Fog. Drag. The moment he stepped into the shower, everything changed. Hot water slammed into his skin and scorched its way through his system like his nerves had been rebooted. Something inside him snapped back into alignment with a precision that startled him. Thoughts sharpened instantly, snapping back into the clear, familiar pattern he'd had before the UA entrance exam had shattered everything. The fog evaporated. The buzzing silence in his skull cleared like it had never existed at all. 3 realizations hit him in rapid succession: clean, clinical, and terrifying. 1. He had woken up feeling fine. Clear. Normal. But only minutes in the chilled air of the home had dragged him downward into something sluggish, dull, disconnected, like a lead weight had latched onto his mind and refused to let go. Even the memories of that time were foggy and thin. He knew he had been trying not to cry, felt more than he remembered, been overwhelmed, but all he could recall now was blankness. A blankness that wasn't natural. Not for him. Not for anyone. 2. His emotional processing had been warped. Muted. Wrong. He'd been locked into linear goals, directives rather than feelings. His brain had prioritized tasks, not emotions. Achievement, not dreams. Obligation, not want. Even the things that should have been emotion-driven, like making his mom proud, had felt empty. Functional. Like he was completing a checklist, not living a life. 3. Nothing about this was normal. Not for a human body. Not for a quirkless boy. Not for anyone. And especially not for Izuku Midoriya, who had never not once experienced anything exceptional, miraculous, or even mildly out of the ordinary in his entire life. He wasn't the sort of person strange things happened to. If anything, the universe had gone out of its way to treat him with boring, cruel consistency. That made this heat-induced clarity, this cold-induced emotional paralysis, this sudden shift in cognition all the more horrifying. Because it meant something had changed. Something big. And nothing about it felt like a gift. If anything, it felt like a curse. He slid down until he was sitting on the shower floor, the water hammering onto his shoulders in steady, burning sheets. His skin drank in the heat greedily, like a starved thing. He pressed his palm to his chin, eyes narrowing in deep concentration. The heat soaked into him, saturating him, and his mind revved like an engine that had finally been given fuel. Am I under the effects of a quirk? The thought sounded ridiculous even in his own head. He was quirkless. Clinically quirkless. Every test he'd ever taken proved it. There was nothing to activate, nothing to mutate, nothing to awaken. And yet, it was the only explanation his brain could produce that didn't fall apart under scrutiny. He shivered out of habit, not cold, and a single tear rolled down his cheek. Then another. And another. The intensity startled him. Just 10 minutes ago, standing in his room after waking up, he had felt nothing. Not sadness. Not grief. Not loss. Just a muted, gray flatness that made tossing his life's work into the trash feel reasonable. Efficient. The logical choice. He had discarded everything he had ever loved like it was garbage. But now with heat sinking into him, thrumming through his bloodstream, igniting his veins, the grief hit like a blade to the ribs. All the work he'd poured into his hero dream. All the years of studying quirks, memorizing patterns, and charting hypothetical evolutions. Thousands of hours of notes, diagrams, theories. Entire futures he had built for himself with nothing but stubborn willpower and a cheap composition notebook. And it all suddenly felt wasted. Laughably wasted. A child's fantasy dressed up as analysis. He had spent so much time studying heroes, dissecting quirks, learning their structures, and never enough time training his own worthless body into something even remotely capable. He had built himself to think like a hero, but never to become one. He had been so obsessed with understanding power, with analyzing it, classifying it, theorizing about its limits, that he forgot heroes weren't made by knowledge alone. He had tried to reverse engineer heroism from the outside in, memorizing every pattern, every strategy, every public record, never realizing he needed to earn the foundation first. Earn the body. Earn the strength. Earn the right to stand on the same ground as the people he idolized. Now all of it, every scribbled page, every discarded notebook, every carefully drawn diagram of futures he'd never reach, felt like a delusional waste. Not even the effort mattered. It felt like he'd been a fool from the start. The emotions hit too hard to match how carelessly he'd tossed them aside earlier. A tidal wave crashing into a mind that had been half dead an hour ago. It was absurd, impossible that he could throw away everything he had ever loved and feel nothing. And then moments later, feel everything. It was like those dreams, those ambitions, were items on an old grocery list stuffed in the pocket of last season's pants, things he still needed, things he still wanted but had forgotten existed, until the heat made him remember. Until the clarity forced him to look at the truth. He had never been weak because he lacked a quirk. He had been weak because he had convinced himself he couldn't become anything without one. He had built his entire identity on the absence of power, on a diagnosis stamped on a piece of paper when he was 4, and somehow let it define every breath he took since. He had wrapped himself in the word quirkless like it was destiny, never once letting himself believe he could be more than the category he'd been shoved into. And now, standing at the fractured edge of an awakening he didn't understand, the truth ripped through him with enough force to steal the air from his lungs. His emotions roared back with such intensity that he could barely breathe. He scrubbed at his face with both hands, breath stuttering, trying desperately to get his mind back on track. Back to logic. Back to structure. Back to anything that made sense. But the grief kept coming. The clarity kept sharpening. And the heat kept feeding both. Something was wrong with him. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. Not just physically. Not just mentally. Not just emotionally. Something inside him had shifted, broken open, rewired itself, and whatever was changing, he didn't know if he would still be the same person once it finished. And heat, hot water, flame, warmth was the only thing that made him feel real. Why? How? What did it mean? He needed answers. He needed logic. He needed anything that made sense. He wiped his eyes harshly, trying to breathe, trying to reassemble the thoughts that kept scattering the moment the cold state memories intruded. What was wrong with him? This had to be a quirk. Some kind. Some mutation he'd never known about. Something latent. Something triggered. Something. But no quirk did this. Not as far as he knew. Not in any study he'd read, any hero profile he had memorized, any medical report he'd pored over. No quirk made the world feel so wrong, so inconsistent, so simultaneously urgent and unimportant. No quirk made the cold feel like death and heat feel like clarity. No quirk made him think in directives instead of feelings. This wasn't anything documented. He would know. He'd spent too long studying quirks to have missed something this massive. His eyes darted to the phone propped outside the shower, screen angled toward him with the clock glowing faintly. Only a minute had passed. A minute. He'd lived an avalanche of emotion in 60 seconds. A mental breakdown, a hypothesis, a counter-hypothesis. All in a span of time he used to spend blinking sleep from his eyes. His mind was working faster. Sharper. Like the heat itself was fuel, raw energy poured straight into his neurons. And that terrified him. Because if heat brought clarity and cold brought numbness, then this wasn't an external quirk at all. It was internal. It was him. Which was impossible. He had taken every test. Every diagnostic. Every physical exam and quirk analysis available to quirkless children. He had been stamped as quirkless so many times it had become a piece of him, a label that shaped his bones, his breathing, his dreams. He didn't know who he would be without it. His shaking slowed not from calm, but from mental acceleration as his brain shoved itself into overdrive. 1,000 memories flickered like pages in a hurricane. The countless quirk awakenings he'd studied. Documented mutation patterns. Rare exceptions buried in outdated forums and forgotten research PDFs. Hundreds of thousands of quirks he'd researched until his eyes burned. And only one phenomenon even approached what was happening to him. Only one. Quirk awakening variant conditions. The terminology was fuzzy, fragmented notes from years ago pieced together under frantic clarity, but the core idea slammed into him with surgical precision. Some quirks didn't awaken at 4. Some needed a trigger, a stimulus, a push. Sometimes emotional. Sometimes environmental. Sometimes traumatic. Sometimes all of the above. And the longer a quirk remained dormant, the more the quirk factor mutated to compensate. He remembered a case. A boy whose quirk didn't manifest until 8. It should have been simple fire generation. By every measurable standard, his parents' quirks were weak, barely above the output of cheap butane lighters. And yet, the long dormancy had warped the boy's quirk, mutated it until it awakened as something far beyond its original blueprint. Fire telekinesis and heat projection strong enough to rival Endeavor's early work from the very first use. The only downside, a catastrophic one, was that his body hadn't fully adapted alongside the mutation. His heat resistance was too low. The boy would have to spend years training just to avoid burning himself alive. There were dozens of cases like that. Maybe hundreds unreported. At least 1 or 2 every generation. Some were even misdiagnosed as quirkless. Not common. Just possible. And the misdiagnosis rate for quirklessness was so astronomically low it bordered on myth. Less than a fraction of a percent. Improbable. Inconsistent with any normal statistical spread. And completely incompatible with Izuku Midoriya's life. He had never been lucky. He had never been the exception. Other people were lucky. His mom lucky and skilled enough to carve her way up the medical field to chief medical officer. Kaken lucky that his parents' quirks combined into something brutally powerful. His classmates lucky simply by existing with something unique, something special. Izuku was not lucky. Izuku was unlucky. He was 14. 14. 10 years past the normal awakening window. 6 years past the longest documented case of a variant awakening condition. His heart hammered. His throat tightened. His breath stuttered in and out of his chest like a misfiring engine. Trauma-based awakening. Delayed manifestation. Long-term quirk factor GSTTN. Mutation induced by emotional extremes. When combined, they created the rarest, most unstable awakenings on record. And Izuku had just survived one of the most severe emotional traumas possible, and he had done it at 14. His attempted suicide. The trauma leading up to it. The trauma after. The physical shock. The cold biting into his brainstem. The dread. And the exact moment he almost slipped fully into death. When that dream. The one he can still see burned behind his eyelids with every blink. His theory snapped into place with horrifying ease. If he was right, then he wasn't just awakening a quirk. He was still in the first phase of a late-stage awakening, half-formed, half-baked, his neurochemistry and physiology rearranging themselves cell by cell. Slow. Dangerous. Unpredictable. And rewriting him in ways he could neither measure nor understand. Children didn't have to fear this. Their quirks awakened early. Their personalities formed with their power, not after it. Their brains adapted while still soft, still malleable, still rewiring themselves constantly as they grew. But the later a quirk awakened, the later it mutated, the later it seized the body, the more violently it changed the person. Izuku wasn't sure if he was going to be Izuku when this awakening finished. That thought alone hollowed him. And if trauma had been the catalyst, then surviving his attempt might not have been a coincidence. It might have been the trigger. The switch. The key. Something between a laugh and a sob cracked out of him, sharp, ugly, the sound of ice splintering under weight. Really? The accusation boiled up before he could stop it. Really? It tore out of him on a broken breath. A snicker clawed its way up from his chest, hollow, humorless, poisoned. He tilted his head back, letting scalding water beat down into his eyes until the light blurred and the world warped. It took me trying to kill myself for something to happen? His voice pitched between hysteria and despair. Anything? Breaking my leg trying to fly, breaking my arm trying to use super strength, huffing and puffing like an idiot trying to breathe fire, none of it worked. None of it. He shoved himself upright, gripping the wall to keep from collapsing as pressure swelled behind his eyes, anger expanding and imploding at the same time. And this is how you awaken? His voice cracked into something sharp and venomous. After all this time? And I can't even enjoy you. You. The words died on his tongue. He wasn't spiraling. He was unraveling. He was screaming at a quirk that wasn't even fully formed, blaming it for years of pain as if it had chosen to abandon him. But quirks didn't choose anything. There was no intent. No malice. No grand design. No apology. It was just his DNA. Just biology finally reacting. Just a trigger pulled too late for it to matter the way he had once dreamed. A ragged breath tore itself out of his lungs. He blinked toward his phone on the counter. 3 minutes had passed since he stepped into the shower. 3 minutes. It felt like an hour. Like a lifetime. Like he'd lived and died and lived again in the space between seconds. He'd had enough. He needed to prepare himself. Today meant stepping into the open world, surrounded by hundreds if not thousands of people at school. And at least there was one small use for that cold feeling. Because he didn't want to feel anything else. Not fear. Not panic. Not those eyes burning into his back. Not the sky closing in. Not the hand squeezing around his ribs whenever someone got too close. Before, the numbness had muted all of it. At least the cold state had stripped those fears away. He hated the dissociation, but he feared his own fear more. If numbness could smother that terror again, then maybe he could survive the day. He didn't want to arrive at school able to recognize the fear. Or danger. Or himself. He reached for the shower knob and froze mid-motion. Directives. Choices. Decisions. He needed them locked in before the clarity evaporated, before the cold seeped back in and rewired his priorities again. Before he became someone he didn't trust. 1. He murmured, voice low but steady, get to class on time. 2. Absorb the information the teachers give. 3. Stop by the pawn shop and buy something I can train with. If this quirk can do even one useful thing, maybe I can still become a hero. If not, his breath trembled, then at least I'll be like everyone else. And 4. Make it home safe, get back in the shower on the highest heat setting, and stay until I can think like this again. He repeated the directives under his breath. Again. And again. Until they were carved into him like grooves. Only then did he shut the shower off. Cold rushed in, immediately pouring over him, draining the heat from his limbs, trying to drag him back into that gray fog. But not fast enough. Not yet. Another observation. The longer he stayed in the heat, the longer the clarity remained afterward. A slow fade, not an instant collapse. Yesterday, he'd been in the shower much longer before the dissociation hit. But maybe that wasn't the only factor. Maybe something else had played a role. A secondary variable. Or a tertiary one. He swallowed, dread creeping along his spine. Whatever this was, it wasn't simple. And it wasn't finished. No quirk was ever finished on the first day of its awakening. Izuku stepped out of the shower with steam still clinging to his skin like a second layer. The heat bled from him almost instantly like it had been ripped away, and his lungs hitched at the sudden emptiness. Clarity didn't disappear all at once. It frayed. Little threads were coming loose at the edges of his thoughts. He forced himself to move before he felt it slip further. He decided on his clothing before he even reached his room, an extra layer under his uniform, the seasonal scarf and beanie, and 3 pairs of socks. Anything to hold in heat. Anything to slow the degradation. Anything to buy him more time. He needed data. He needed to gauge how fast the clarity decayed. He needed to know what slowed the decline, what sped it up, and what variables he could manipulate. There were more unknowns than knowns. And if he was brutally honest, he wasn't entirely sure this was a quirk. Because there was always the chance that when he'd hit the water, bleeding and dying, something in his brain had simply broken. He was dressed in minutes. His uniform hung a little stiff with all the extra layers underneath. His hands shook as he packed his bag, books, notes, a fistful of extra pens he didn't remember grabbing. He tossed in a small pocket notebook, too. For observations. For symptoms. For anything he couldn't trust himself to remember once the cold pulled him under again. So many variables. By the time he passed the front door, he felt the clarity thinning like static beginning to creep into a clean radio signal. His thoughts blurred at the edges. His eyes caught on his old yellow backpack, sagging and misshapen near the entryway. He had just put it there, and yet the reasoning was gone now. He might as well just carry it around everywhere. Putting it down meant less back pain, but increased the time to get to class. He had to be there on time. He stared at it for a long moment, too long. Blink. Nod. Move. Food. Lunch. He needed to prepare lunch. He couldn't go to the cafeteria, not after missing a week. Not this late in the year. That last month was when the teachers cared the least, and the bullies cared the most. He muttered to himself without realizing it, words slurring slightly, clarity ebbing. He didn't even register the soft creak of a door opening behind him. Izuku. He jerked so hard he nearly fell, heart lurching into his throat. He spun around with wide eyes. His mom stood in her bedroom doorway, hair rumpled, wearing sleep clothes, and an expression caught between concern and disbelief. Izuku, she repeated, stepping closer. What do you think you're doing? I'm going to school. His voice sounded small. Wrong. Uncertain. You just woke up yesterday, baby. She frowned, stepping closer. Relax for a few more days. I can get the doctor's notes. You can stay home, rest, be here where I can. But I'm okay, he cut in, though even he could hear that it wasn't true. I promise. I need to do something today. If I can't take it, I'll stay home tomorrow. Her gaze softened, but concern etched deeper into her features. She reached for him, her Quirk tugging softly at his scarf until he stumbled into her space. Her fingers straightened the fabric at his neck with practiced care, little motions she'd done his whole life, and then she folded him into her arms, holding him with a warmth that cut through every cold place inside him. Warm, full-bodied, tight. The moment her arms wrapped around him, the clarity snapped back into place. It was like someone lit a match inside his skull. A surge of heat shot through him, anxiety thinning, thoughts sharpening, emotions organizing themselves in a way he couldn't manage alone. He let out a small, shaky breath he hadn't realized he was holding. If you're sure, she murmured against his hair. Call me if anything happens. Even if I'm in an emergency case, I'll hand things off and come running. I know who I can trust to take over. Don't put your patients at risk, Izuku whispered back. If you start doing that, you might lose your position. The only one who could fire me is the CEO of the hospital, she said, pulling back just enough to brush his cheek. And I only step into surgery when I'm absolutely needed. She knows that. She's the one who asks me to cover when things go south. She owes me more favors than I can count. Trust me, I'll make it work. Her warmth soaked straight through his layers. Clarity blossomed sharper, cleaner, steadier. For a moment, a brief, fragile moment, he almost felt normal. Almost. Now, since we're both up, she said gently, brushing a thumb along his cheek before stepping back, let me make you something warm to eat. You've been chilly since you got home. The softness in her eyes pinched into concern, brief, but unmistakable. And for a moment, Izuku forgot she wasn't just his mother. She was a chief medical officer. One of the sharpest minds in the prefecture. And she was looking at him the same way he was looking at himself. Like whatever was happening to him wasn't normal. Like she could feel the wrongness radiating off him in the same way she'd once felt fevers through touch. Considering he got his brain from her, not his father, it was only natural she was already circling the same conclusion he'd reached. A variant Quirk awakening. Or, he was under the influence of a Quirk. That would be good, he said, meeting her eyes with a small grin. I'm really hungry, actually. And for the first time since before the exam, it wasn't a lie. He was hungry, achingly so. But even that hunger felt distant, slightly muted, as if it lived behind a thin sheet of glass, as his emotions had. Displaced. Present, but not fully connected to him. Something he had to keep track of consciously, or else he'd lose sight of it entirely. He chewed his lip and followed her into the kitchen, taking his usual seat at the island so he could watch her cook. His mom moved with efficiency, pulling out the containers he'd dropped yesterday: rice, fish, eggs. Then with a series of small, sharp gestures, she summoned a few more ingredients from the fridge and cabinets. Her Quirk floated each item to her hand without her needing to look. When he was younger, she barely used it, saying it was important for him to see people do things manually. But he had begged again and again just to watch it, fascinated every time. Over the years, she'd grown more casual with it to the point she could fetch multiple objects at once without breaking rhythm. Izuku smiled into his scarf as he unlocked his phone, scrolling through the new flood of morning articles. Notifications piled endlessly: Quirk science updates, UA discourse threads, a headline about the court of Quirks again, another hero debut. It wasn't often she cooked this early anymore. Her career kept her busy, far too busy for daily breakfasts. But today, she was making Ichiju Sansai, a full traditional spread. Steamed rice, grilled fish, eggs, and miso soup. Not the Western dishes she'd slowly adopted since Morgan Tsunatori from the pharmacy department introduced her to pancakes. The kitchen warmed slowly, layer by layer, with the scent of miso and frying fish. Steam curled lazily through the air, softening the light. Utensils clattered with familiar rhythm, punctuated by the low hum of his mother moving around the stove with practiced ease. It felt almost peaceful. Almost normal. Almost enough to make him forget for a heartbeat how much he feared what he was turning into. Breakfast appeared in front of him before he even realized how much time had passed. His mind had drifted off again, shut down, really, while he scrolled through articles. Headlines bled together into a jumbled slurry of words, none of them finding purchase in his thoughts. He blinked, lifted his head, and thanked his mom quietly. Then he began to eat. Bite by bite. Next to her. She kept glancing at him, subtle, but strange. Like she was checking for changes. Or making sure he was still him. He ignored it without a thought and focused on the meal. Halfway through, the heat of the food finally hit his system. Warmth flooded his limbs. His pulse steadied. His thoughts aligned like someone had brushed debris off a cluttered desk. He froze mid-bite, chopsticks hovering awkwardly before he lowered them. A flicker of embarrassment shot through him, and he gave her a small, sheepish smile. He must have been digging in with his hands at some point during it all. His fingers were slick with fish grease he'd barely noticed. He wiped them quickly on a towel, face burning. He had slipped into that mindset again. Sometime during his scrolling, while the cold had crept in. When he hadn't been paying attention. His directives had been simple: find something interesting to read and eat when food appears. And he'd followed them. Blindly. Automatically. He hadn't even realized he'd stopped thinking. Izuku swallowed, the warmth from the food still spreading through him. He needed to be more careful with his thoughts. If he wasn't paying attention, if he let the cold state take over, he wasn't sure where his mind would drift. Or what version of himself he'd end up being when the heat finally brought him back. Izuku finished the last bite of his breakfast, swallowed, and set his chopsticks down. The warmth lingered in his chest like a fading ember, the heat surging through every inch of him like water filling a container. He gathered his dishes and rinsed them in the sink, the water hissing faintly against the ceramic before putting them into the small washing machine. "Thank you for breakfast," he said quietly as he dried his hands off and readjusted his sleeves, making sure the buttons didn't come undone like they had a habit of. Inko didn't hesitate as he turned to her as she approached with her own dishes, setting them to the side. She pulled him into one more hug, soft and tight and grounding. "Have a good day, sweetheart. Please call me if anything feels wrong." He nodded into her shoulder, then stepped away and grabbed his bag from beside the door. He ran a quick double-check, the heat-sharpened speed of his thoughts finishing the entire inventory before he even finished adjusting the strap. He had everything. He was ready. Or he had to be. The moment he stepped outside, the cold morning air didn't just touch him, it knifed under his collar and slammed straight into his lungs. His breath hitched, sharp and trembling, escaping him in a low shudder. He looked up. The sky stretched overhead, vast, pale, empty. Too big. Too open. Too exposed. A ceiling ripped off the world. His pulse spiked immediately, clamping down on his ribs with bruising force. His thoughts splintered. Too open. Too high. Too bright. Someone could be up there. Someone could be watching. Something could fall. Something could. He bit down on the inside of his cheek hard. Harder. It burst. His mouth filled with blood. Not normal blood. Not the metallic tang he'd known all his life. This was muted, heavy, with a strange mineral bitterness that sat wrong on his tongue. But he was too stressed, too wired, too panicked to notice the difference. The pain grounded him for a breath. He still wanted to run back inside. But he walked anyway. Aldera Junior High was only a 40-minute walk shorter than most, but every step felt like forcing his legs through freezing mud. He clutched the straps of his backpack tighter, fingers dragging compulsively at the frayed stitching. His jaw worked ceaselessly, chewing at already broken skin like the tick was the only thread keeping him tethered. The street wasn't even crowded yet. A few students. A handful of office workers. Someone carrying coffee, someone biking past, someone unlocking their shop. They weren't looking at him. They weren't. But he felt them. Their eyes on his back. Their glances brushing his shoulders. The pressure of attention from windows, from rooftops, from the stretch of sky itself. Watching. Measuring. Waiting. He picked up his pace. Then slowed down. Then sped up again in a jittery, uneven rhythm. By the time he reached the halfway point, his breathing was a slow collapse, shallow inhales, shaky exhales, every lungful of air too cold to keep. He whispered his directives under his breath, voice just a sliver of sound. 1. Get to class on time. 2. Absorb the information the teachers give. 3. Stop by the pawn shop and buy something I can train with. If this quirk can do even one useful thing, maybe I can still become a hero. If not, his voice trembled. Then at least I'll be like everyone else. 4. Make it home safe. Get back in the shower. Highest heat setting. Stay until I can think like that again. He murmured them again. And again. Each repetition smoothed his tone sharper, flatter, thinner, like he was filing his own mind into shape. But the cold was already seeping into him. Bit by bit. Drip. 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 His fear didn't vanish. It receded, slow, steady, terrifyingly methodical. Just slow enough for his hyperactive mind to track the changes, but not slow enough to catch them all. The fear of the open sky. The fear of eyes lingering on him from places he couldn't see. The fear of something above, behind, around, watching, waiting, pressing down. Then the numb quiet slid in behind his thoughts, thin and spreading like frost across a windowpane. Awareness of danger dulled. Dread softened. The world lost its urgency. The heat in his mind was leaking out. Drip. 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 Then it clicked. His spine straightened. His breathing leveled. His pace steadied into something almost purposeful. He had to get to class. And follow his directives. Everything else could be ignored, discarded until the moment it demanded his attention. He would deal with problems when they arrived. Not before. Not after. Until then. He had things to do. With a small twist, he shifted his bag forward and pulled out the pocket notebook and a pen. He flipped to the first page. His mind reminded him he had forgotten to prepare lunch. He had missed something. It was likely the worry's fault. Observation 1. His voice was clear, precise, not the frantic mutter he was known for. A few students nearby turned their heads. Their looks ranged from annoyed to mocking. He ignored them. Blood tastes weird, he said quietly, pen scratching. Less coppery. More like over-mineralized water. He hummed, pressing his tongue to the healed punctures in his cheek. They closed within 20 minutes. He bit down again hard, feeling the rough skin tear loose. The blood pooled into his mouth, thick and heavy. Cold. That was new. He should have noticed. He didn't. His tongue gathered the blood and the small chunk of flesh, moving mechanically. He brought his thumb to his lips, swiped the blood on, and examined it. Black liquid stared back. He pressed the bloody thumbprint to the paper, then set the small blackened chunk beneath it. Blood is the same super dark black as the skin on my back, he noted calmly. Same with the scar tissue in my mouth. He liked the area already sealed shut, then bit again. And again. And again. Cold rippled through him. He shivered violently, fingers spasming around his pen. Weird. He hadn't felt this cold a few minutes ago. Perhaps heat is used for more than increased cognition, he murmured, voice steady despite his shaking hands. Possibly tied to physical function as well. This level of cold matches pre-shower conditions. He paused, thinking. And it took significantly longer to reach this point despite the added layers, meaning my body may be expending heat faster. Either early quirk awakening is forcing extreme quirk usage and corresponding drawbacks, or, he tapped the paper once, decisively, I'm still in the mutation phase. Heat retention may improve as the quirk stabilizes. He breathed out slowly. No fear. No dread. It felt. Well, not good, that too wasn't observable, but he could call it, preferable to the alternative. Just clear, flat analysis. Maybe it was because he hadn't been paying attention last time he slipped into this state. But now seeing it happen, feeling it happen, he realized the thinking itself was different. Harder to multitask. Harder to hold emotional context. Harder to care. But easier to act. Easier to move without hesitation. He liked the once mutilated side of his cheek, feeling the strange new texture, smooth, slightly rough, like ceramic that hadn't finished cooling. Black ceramic. Black flesh. He filed the sensation away. He was also more willing to harm himself for data. He noted that easily. Not as a concern. Not exactly a bad thing, provided he got some heat later. He could test this properly. Preferably after class. Perhaps he could stop by a food stand before the first PRD and supplement the low reserves. No. Not smart. Could cause higher heat functions to begin prematurely. Fear would surface. Fear would be obtrusive. He clicked his pen once and closed the notebook with precise movement, slipping it back into his bag. Here we go, he whispered, more to the cold air than to himself. He adjusted his bag, stared up at the looming form of Aldera Junior High, and walked through the gates. The courtyard buzzed faintly with early morning noise, whispers, footsteps, chatter. Someone snickered as he passed. Someone else muttered, Deku, under their breath with a laugh. He heard all of it. Registered none of it as important. His mind simply made a note. Unimportant stimuli. Continue directive. A shoulder bumped him hard. He didn't look at who it was. He didn't flinch. Another boy stuck out a foot to try to trip him. His body stepped cleanly over it without breaking stride, like his muscles had decided for him. The boy cursed behind him. Izuku didn't turn. The cold state stripped all social weight from the world. Taunts, jabs, mockery, irrelevant data. He reached the doors. Walked inside. Made his way through the hallway with the efficiency of someone executing pre-programmed instructions. Which, if he were capable of finding humor in anything right now, might have been funny. A quirkless kid finally running like clockwork. Classroom. Seat. Directive 1, arrive on time. He slid the door open. Immediately. Look who finally crawled back, Bakugo drawled from the front row, loud enough for the whole room. What, the circus kick you out? Not even clown show material. Laughter rippled through the room, sharp, eager from some, mean-spirited from others. A few students snickered behind their hands. But not everyone laughed. Izuku caught it in a blink. Two boys exchanging uneasy glances. A girl biting her lip. Someone else was shrinking slightly in their seat, like the venom in Bakugo's voice hit deeper today. Concern. Worry. Not for him, no one in this class cared about him that way, but for the state of him. He must have looked worse than he realized. Izuku's gaze flicked toward Bakugo for half a second. Not in fear. Not in anger. Just a quick confirmation of the noise source, the way someone checks the direction of a passing car before stepping onto the road. Nothing in him reacted. No flinch. No spike of adrenaline. No twisting shame in his gut. The insult slid through him like cold air through an open window, felt for a moment, then gone. No response formed. No emotion rose. His mind didn't even bother to categorize the insult as relevant data. He simply walked past Bakugo's desk, ignoring the way the blonde's grin faltered in irritation, and took his seat. He set his bag down. Saturday. Confirmed the correct notebook for this class. Pulled out a pencil. Flipped to a clean page with the kind of precise, economical movement no one in the room had ever seen him make. Then he just sat. Body still. Breath even. Posture straight. Calm and empty as winter stone. Bakugo blinked. The laugh behind him died mid-breath, a strangled hiccup of amusement turning into confusion. Izuku's pen tapped once against the desk. Then he clicked it open and neatly wrote the subject listed on the chalkboard. Directive 1, completed. Directive 2, begin absorbing information. So he waited for class to begin. The quiet only lasted a moment. What the F dash, Deku? Bakugo exploded, voice louder than usual, raw, jagged, like he wasn't prepared for how irritated he suddenly felt. Maybe Izuku not reacting made his fuse shorter. Maybe it made him feel ignored. Maybe it made him feel small. A hand fisted in Izuku's shirt and yanked him upright. At this distance, Bakugo's blood ran hot, overwhelmingly hot, like a furnace pressed too close. Izuku looked up. Slowly. Expression shifting into something delicately, coldly disgusted, like he'd been given the wrong dish at a restaurant. If you burn this shirt, Izuku said, voice low and monotone, shockingly monotone, then I will be out of dress code viable shirts for the rest of the month, Katsuki. Please refrain. The entire room froze. Even Bakugo's grip loosened, just barely. Izuku blinked once, calm and clinical. And I wasn't at the circus. He said it like he was correcting a misfiled data point. Not like he cared. Not like it mattered. Just a necessary clarification before moving on. Bakugo stared at him. Not in mockery. Not in fury. In confusion, raw, unfiltered confusion, like Izuku had suddenly started speaking an alien language. The hell did you just say to me? He snapped, grip tightening again. Who the F do you think you're talking to? His voice cracked louder with each word, rising in pitch and volume like a bomb building pressure. Spit hit Izuku's face. He didn't flinch. Bakugo shook him once, violently. You think you can talk to me like that? You think you can? Bakugo? A hesitant voice cut through the noise. Bakugo whipped around so fast the desk rattled. It was Fujita, one of the boys who'd looked uneasy when Izuku walked in. His hands were clenched, knuckles white. You should really calm down, Fujita muttered, eyes glued to his desk. And maybe just leave Midoriya alone for the rest of the year? The room went dead still. Bakugo's face twisted as if he'd just been insulted by a stray dog. The F did you just say? Bakugo barked, stepping toward Fujita like a lit fuse. Why the hell should I leave Deku alone? Huh? Since when do you care about him? Why the sudden change, Fujita? You go soft overnight? Last I checked, you're the one who came up with the idea for the Halloween party. A ripple of discomfort moved through the room. Everyone remembered the Halloween party. Several eyes darted toward Izuku. He just stared back, blank and unreactive, like it had nothing to do with him at all. Fujita flinched, breath catching in his throat. He opened his mouth. Closed it. Swallowed hard. Then, his voice trembling like something being peeled out of his chest, he whispered, because we. His eyes flicked to the boy beside him for a heartbeat. We carried him to the hospital. Bakugo stopped so abruptly that his shoe squeaked on the tile. His whole body went rigid, shoulders bunched, fingers curling, jaw locking as if the words were a blow he couldn't dodge. The class shifted. Chairs creaked. No one dared breathe too loud. Fujita forced himself to continue. A week ago. Near the park by my house. We found him lying in the frost-soaked, freezing, barely breathing. He was blue, Bakugo. We thought he was dead. He didn't look at Bakugo. He didn't look at Izuku. He just stared at the floor like he was confessing to something unforgivable. Saito, his friend, normally loud, normally snickering with the rest of them, spoke without lifting his head. We didn't know what happened. We couldn't leave him there. The paramedics said they'd do what they could and asked his name. After that, we were sent to talk to an officer. His voice thinned. But we didn't know anything. So they sent us home. A shaky inhale. Then he didn't show up to school. Any day. And I thought he died. We both did. His hands clenched. We thought he was gone. The silence was suffocating. Even Bakugu's breath stalled. Izuku blinked once, the movement slow and strangely detached. "Oh," he said lightly. "That was you too?" Both boys stiffened as if the casual tone physically struck them. "I was certain I was going to freeze to death," Izuku added, voice even and mild, like he was discussing homework. "Thank you." The lack of emotion. The lack of appropriate fear. The wrongness of the tone, it hung in the classroom like a cold fog, sinking into everyone's skin. Bakugu stared at him, not angry, not smug, but rattled. His eyes narrowed, searching Izuku's face like it might peel back and reveal something else underneath. Something wrong. Something new. Something dangerous. Something, anything. Then he found his voice and it exploded out of him. "What the hell do you mean, freeze to, why were you, why didn't, what the F?" The blonde's voice rose. The class jolted. A couple flinched hard enough their desks squeaked. Bakugu's volume spiked so sharply that the windows trembled in their frames. And then slam. The door crashed open. Enough. Their teacher stormed in, face already flushed with irritation and exhaustion, rings under his eyes. "Bakugu. Sit down. It is far too early to be screaming like a feral animal." The room fell silent in a single, suffocating heartbeat. Bakugu didn't move. He stood there, chest heaving, sweat beading at his brow, hand half raised like he'd forgotten what he intended to do with it. His eyes stayed locked on Izuku, wide, confused, unnerved in a way no one had ever seen from him. Izuku lifted his gaze lazily. Expression flat. Pen resting loosely between two fingers. As if Bakugu's meltdown was background noise he'd tuned out as it had begun. The teacher cleared his throat, louder this time. "Bakugu. Sit down. Unless you'd like detention for the rest of the term." A threat, one that fell on deaf ears, all knowing it wasn't true. And still no movement from the blonde who stood like a statue. Izuku blinked once, almost mechanically. Bakugu's voice dropped, cracked, then surged back into a growl. "We're not done here, Deku. I swear to God, after school, you're telling me what the hell happened. You hear me? You." "Bakugu," the teacher snapped, exasperation feathering into anger, "sit down. This class cannot begin until." "That's inconvenient," Izuku said quietly. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They sliced through the room cleanly. Every head turned toward him. Izuku continued, tone even and conversational, like he was giving a mundane weekend update rather than detonating a bomb in the middle of homeroom. "I'd rather go home right after school, so if it's that important. I tried to kill myself at the old tree bridge. You know the one. Scenic spot." He paused, blinking slowly. "Apparently, I failed pretty hard." The classroom ruptured into shock. Gasps. Hands clapping over mouths. A muffled squeak from someone in the back. Far more of a reaction than Izuku had predicted. He'd expected awkward silence, maybe a shrug, then a segue back to math. That's what they usually did, ignore him and continue. Bakugu's face drained of color so fast it looked like someone had pulled the plug on him. Izuku didn't care enough to see it. His mind simply concluded they wanted additional context before returning to class. "The staff said it was a miracle I survived," he added, brushing flecks of Bakugu's spit off his notebook with distracted annoyance. "But that seems unreasonable. More likely, I just did a bad job. Don't you agree?" The class seized like a collective heart attack. Someone choked on air. Someone else whispered, horrified, "Oh my God." Fujita slapped a hand over his own mouth, eyes blown wide. Saito stared at the surface of his desk as though it had turned into a bottomless pit. The teacher looked like someone had sucker punched the breath out of him. Jaw slack. Eyes unfocused. Color draining by degrees. Izuku examined the dampened, wrinkled notebook page. It was ruined. Pointless. He tore it out with measured ease. Crumpled it into a tight ball. Then flicked it across the room. It hit the trash can dead center. Thunk. Perfect shot. The sound echoed in the unnatural silence that followed. A silence so complete it felt like the entire room forgot how to breathe. Izuku grabbed his pen again, clicking it once. Then he looked up at the teacher. Then at Bakugu. "Can we start class now?" he asked simply. "My mom wouldn't appreciate us wasting time." The sentence fell into the silence like a stone into still water. The teacher opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, then just stood there, frozen, like he'd forgotten every word he'd rehearsed in the car on the way to school. His gaze flicked from Izuku, to Bakugu, to the class, back to Izuku. No one breathed. The air felt brittle. Finally, painfully, he cleared his throat. "All right. Everyone take your seats. We need to begin the lesson." Half the class was already seated. The other half folded into their chairs quickly and silently for the first time all year. Bakugu didn't move at first. He stood beside Izuku's desk, fists clenched so hard his knuckles went bone white. He looked at Izuku with an expression Izuku had never seen on him, a mixture of disbelief, horror, confusion, and something else he couldn't parse. Couldn't bother to parse. Slowly, like gears grinding in a broken machine, Bakugo released Izuku's shirt. His fingers trembled as he lowered his hand. He didn't speak. Didn't sneer. Didn't even curse. Izuku was pleasantly surprised. He staggered back a step, just one, and sat down in his seat as if someone had shoved him there. The entire class watched him sit. He didn't look up again. The teacher took a breath that sounded more like a gasp. Okay, math. Yes. Today we're reviewing polynomial factoring. Izuku flipped open his notebook. Directive 2, absorb the information. The teacher turned to the chalkboard, hand shaking as he wrote the first equation. Let's, start with something simple. X squared, we can factor that using the difference of squares. Murmurs rippled through the class, soft, uncertain. Eyes darted between Izuku and the teacher. Everyone looked too afraid to speak. Izuku lifted his pencil. Wrote, x plus 3, x, 3. The teacher continued. Now, a slightly more complex polynomial. Izuku raised his hand. The teacher actually flinched. Yes. Midoriya? Izuku read the problem on the board, tapped his pencil once, and said in a calm, flat monotone. That one factors into 3x, 1, x plus 5. You can distribute to check. The teacher stared at the board, then at Izuku, then back at the board again, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to trust what he'd just heard. That is, correct, he managed. Yes. Good. Moving on. Izuku wrote down the next solution before the teacher even finished writing the equation. His pen moved fast, purposeful, driven by clarity that felt too sharp, too precise. Numbers flowed neatly. Steps aligned. The logic was comforting, clean, and structured, unlike everything else. The silence in the room stretched thin around him. Bakugo, usually loud enough to fill a stadium, hadn't made a single sound. Not even a scoff. He just sat there, elbows on his desk, glancing back at Izuku's with an expression twisted between multiple emotions, like he was attempting to figure out what exactly was going on. Saito and Fujita kept sneaking glances at Izuku, guilty, shaken, unsure. The rest of the class pretended to take notes, pens trembling in their hands. Izuku simply worked. Directive 2, absorb the material. He completed the entire page of problems before the teacher finished the first row. He waited. Patiently. Calmly. Only when the teacher finally moved on did Izuku glance toward the window, toward the open sky looming above the courtyard, vast and crushing in a way that pressed at the edges of his thoughts. A faint trickle of warmth crawled slowly up his spine. Barely there. Barely noticeable. But present. The shivering in his body faded. Forgotten. He stared for a moment longer, waiting for the next set of problems, his attention drifting, everything else softening into background noise. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his small notebook, and jotted down another observation. It wasn't a directive, but some part of him recognized it as important enough to classify with them. When stationary, and not processing information at elevated speed, internal heat appears to slowly increase. Not enough to break the state. Not enough to restore full clarity. Just enough to be detectable. He stared at the sentence for a beat, then added a quick underline. Not much. Not enough. But something. He lifted his eyes back to the window again. The sky was still there, wide, empty, indifferent. He doubted the class would make it to page 2 today. The numbers on his paper were simple. Clean. Logical. The world far less so. Especially now. Especially with a quirk as strange as his one he still wasn't sure wouldn't swallow him whole. 7 hours later, end of classes. Izuku zipped up his bag from the final class, mutely enjoying the lingering silence after most of the students had already left. The smooth metal of the zipper caught his attention for a moment, and he gave it a soft rub with his thumb before moving on. 7 hours. He had sat through 7 hours of lessons, quizzes, worksheets, and whispered gossip, some about him, most about him, and not once had his concentration wavered. Perhaps his quirk was simply an intelligence booster? One that relied on heat and its use, but then what about the black blood and tissue? There were more questions than answers, but he would figure it out. Directive 2 was complete. Directives 3 and 4 were next. He slung his bag over his shoulder easily, glancing around to verify he wasn't being watched. His movements were quiet. Ordered. He didn't need to think about them. 3. Stop by the pawn shop and buy something he could train with. 4. Make it home safe, get back in the shower on the highest heat setting, and stay until the clarity returns. Simple. Straightforward. Necessary. There was only one new observation added to his notebook throughout the entire day, a pattern he hadn't expected. After long stretches of numbness, after the cold stripped everything away, a spark of emotion would sometimes slip back through his system. Not strong. Not whole. Just a pulse, a tremor announced every time by that trickling warmth crawling slowly up his spine. He'd felt it twice during class. A phantom feeling. A little ember trying to burn through frost. Not enough to fully break the cold state. Not enough to be useful. But enough to be noted. Enough to be important. He wrote it down carefully. Passive heat gain, emotional resurgence? Frequency, rare. Intensity, low. Trigger, unknown. He stepped into the hallway. Bakugo was waiting. A surprise. Not a pleasant one. Izuku didn't even slow down. Katsuki fell in behind him almost instantly, a word dying on his lips as Izuku walked past. The silence was odd, no stomping, no shouting, just a tense, vibrating quiet like someone straining to hold back an explosion. Which, knowing the blonde, was the case. Izuku didn't look at him. Didn't acknowledge him. Didn't deviate from his path. This was odd, but nothing worthy of note. He simply kept walking. They passed another class, emptying. Past students whispering behind their hands. Past a teacher who opened their mouth like they wanted to say something, then thought better of it. Bakugo followed the entire time. Right behind him. Like a fuse burning down. This was going to turn into a ground zero situation. Izuku didn't even need to guess. He didn't turn. Didn't break pace. Didn't respond when Bakugo hissed, low and venomous, "Oi. Deku. We're talking about this. You hear me? We are not done." Nothing. Izuku stepped out of the classroom wing. Down the main hall. Toward the shoe lockers. Each directive slotted neatly into place. Outside. Pawn shop. Home. Heat. Katsuki's breathing grew louder behind him, ragged and sharp, frustration and barely contained rage scraping raw against his ribs. Students avoided them entirely. Parted like a rippling wake around them. Everyone remembered what Izuku had said that morning, and those who hadn't been there heard about it anyway, carried on whispers like an urban legend they wished wasn't real. Izuku didn't care. He remembered only his directives. And what mattered? He reached the front doors. Pulled one open. Cold morning air knifed in immediately, needling across his cheeks and fingers. He stepped outside. Katsuki stepped with him. And then a hand clamped onto his shoulder hard enough to jolt him. "Hey!" Izuku stopped. Not by choice. By force. Bakugo spun him half around, expression twisted, eyes burning with a tangle of emotions Izuku couldn't parse through the growing numb haze. Anger. Confusion. Fear. Something ugly, tangled, raw beneath it all. "What the hell is wrong with you today?" Izuku blinked slowly. Once. Bakugo stared at him like he expected screaming. A fight. A breakdown. Anything. But Izuku only looked back with that same flat, unnerving calm. "Let go, Katsuki," he said softly. "I have things to do today that are more important than your tantrum." Bakugo's grip tightened until his knuckles whitened. "What the actual F did you just say? This isn't a tantrum, you nerd. You drop a suicide bombshell in class, act like nothing happened, and then walk out like you're a DMN robot. You think you can just. Izuku waited. Still. Quiet. Empty. The wind curled around them, cold enough to sting exposed skin. Izuku felt the drip of warmth sliding out of him. Drip. 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 Like running water flowing into an endless basin, small sparks of emotion that flared through the day faded into the numbness again. His mind returned to what was important once more. Directive 3. Directive 4. They mattered. Bakugo leaned closer, voice cracking around the edges. "You don't get to walk away from me after saying that shit. You don't get to talk like you're disappointed you didn't die and don't even care." Izuku stared at him. Just stared. Unblinking. As if studying the architecture of Katsuki's words, not the meaning behind them. As if the emotional weight didn't exist. Because to him, it didn't, not right now. Not while the cold kept draining him from the inside out, siphoning off whatever fragile fire made him, leaching the soul from him piece by piece until only directives remained. As if Bakugo wasn't the most dangerous person in this school, and yet Izuku felt nothing. Only cold. Only the directives. Only the next step. Finally, he spoke softly, evenly, like pouring warm water over ice. "I don't see the problem, Katsuki. I didn't die. Obviously." Bakugo's breath stuttered, but Izuku continued before he could interrupt. "And isn't that what you and everyone else wanted anyway? Remember Halloween?" "I do. Perfectly." Bakugo flinched. A real, physical flinch. "I only held out as long as I did because of UA, Izuku said, voice smooth as glass. "Because there was a chance, just a chance I could make it in. Everything else didn't matter." He lifted his chin slightly, eyes empty. "I wanted to get into the hero course. I failed at that. Then I failed to kill myself. A small shrug. There isn't anything else to say. Bakugu's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Izuku didn't stop. And if part of me is disappointed I didn't die? His eyes met Katsuki's flat, unblinking. Well, that's not surprising. That part of me is exactly what you and everyone else at this school worked so hard to cultivate. The words were quiet. The impact was volcanic. Bakugu staggered back half a step as if shoved. Izuku's voice stayed gentle. Even. Dispassionate. Which only made every word aimed at the blonde land harder. There's only so much anyone can take, Katsuki. I broke at Halloween. A faint shift entered his tone, a shadow, a pressure, something ugly clawing its way up from somewhere he hadn't dared look in months. No matter how much I try to forget it, it lingers. You know? It's not something easily forgotten. I beat his eyes unfocused, just for a breath. The pain stayed. The rest didn't. I didn't even remember the details until I opened my mouth just now. He blinked slowly, as if realizing it at the same time he said it. I shoved it down so deep I couldn't recall it when I was standing on that bridge. When I fell off of it into the creek. But my body remembered. Every second. And now I don't think I'll ever be able to forget again. Izuku's voice stayed level but the air around the words seemed to darken. Do you even remember what actually happened that night? What you did? What they did? What happened after everyone left and I was alone? Bakugu stiffened. Izuku didn't stop. Even with the cold eating the edges of his emotions, even with the lack of heat clarity, this part came out unfiltered. Raw. Blunt. Do you remember dragging me behind the gym? His voice didn't rise, but the disgust under dragging was unmistakable. Or do you only remember the part where everyone laughed and high-fived you when you rejoined the party? The word came out like poison. Like rot. Like something that had festered for far too long. Because I remember all of it. His eyes sharpened, the cold behind them turning almost predatory in its stillness. I remember the hands. The kicks. The way I couldn't get back up, no matter how hard I tried. The way no one cared enough to stop it. No matter how loud I cried, begged, or pleaded. A breath sharp, shaky, controlled. The hours of being alone afterward. And then, of course long after you'd gone home, the afterparty that came back for me. Bakugu swallowed hard, audibly, jaw clenching so tight a vein jumped along his temple. And whatever pieces I managed to tape back together after that. Izuku's voice dipped lower, quieter but no longer empty. Not numb. Not calm. Something between all three. Something fractured. Something alive in a way it hadn't been all day. Those got shattered at the entrance exam. He looked directly at Katsuki. Cold. Unblinking. Certain. Bakugu's palms crackled, sparks snapping across his skin, smoke curling upward in faint, angry wisps. Izuku felt it immediately. The heat. The threat. The primal danger in Katsuki's heartbeat accelerating. And it made something inside him click. A small, cold alignment snapping into place like the chambering of a round. For a heartbeat, clarity sharpened like a blade and returned. I don't care for insults much anymore. It came out under his breath, but loud enough for even those passing by to hear. The anger that surged through him was fast, hot, violent, the first real emotion he'd felt all day. A flashfire ripping through the frost. Izuku held it back. Barely. He clenched his jaw hard enough to ache, heat pricking along his spine in a slow, rising tide. Bakugu saw it. He saw the fury breaking through the deadened calm, saw the ire igniting in Izuku's eyes, saw the truth that Izuku was not reacting the way he was supposed to. Not breaking. Not crying. Not cowering. Something else. Something new. Something dangerous. Izuku stepped forward, not aggressively, not loudly, but with a weight behind his words that hit like a punch. Don't act like you suddenly care now. You didn't care then. His voice rose, not a shout, not even close, but sharper, hotter, edged like a blade fresh from the forge. Not when I didn't return to classes for weeks. Not when I came back quiet. Not when I stopped bringing my hero notebooks. Not when my mom went to your house asking if you knew what was wrong with me. Izuku's breath shook, just barely. And I lied to cover your butt. Again. And again. And again. For no reason other than I believed somewhere in that rotten heart of yours you still thought of me as your friend. Bakugu's pupils shrank, hands snapping with angry sparks, sweat beading on his brow from the heat of his own quirk building uncontrolled. He looked furious. He looked confused. He looked scared. You never cared. Izuku's voice flared, quiet, controlled, burning. You were happy to watch me rot. To pretend my silence made your life easier. Acting like that never happened is. He inhaled sharply, breath trembling with the effort of holding back something big, something molten. The heat in his chest swelled painfully, like boiling water pressing against a sealed lid. Insulting. He took one small step closer, expression flat but voice scorching beneath the surface. "And if you would," Izuku continued, each word carved with precision, "never insult me again. I can take your mouth, your attitude, your explosions. All of it. But acting like you suddenly give a shit?" His lip twitched almost a snarl. "I am not taking that." The air between them went very still. Bakugo's hands cracked loud enough to echo. His expression twisted, rage and confusion spiraling together into something volatile. And Izuku's eyes, cold, sharp, focused, never once wavered. And Katsuki Bakugo, faced with something he didn't understand, something he couldn't predict, something that scared him more than he'd admit even to himself, did what Katsuki Bakugo had always done when cornered by fear, of something unknown, of something he didn't understand. He attacked. He threw the first punch. And Izuku didn't even have time to flinch. Friday, March 14th, XX46, Aldera Junior High School, front campus grounds. The crowd of students, those ready to go home and forget the prison of structured learning for at least 12 blessed hours, barely had time to register what happened. The punch connected. The air changed. Heat surged through the chilled afternoon like something alive, snapping into existence with a violent hiss. Bakugo's nitroglycerin sweat ignited, but the bite of cold air turned the combustion, unstable heat expanding too fast, the cold reacting too violently. The detonation was bigger than anyone expected. Bigger than Bakugo intended. Bigger than Bakugo could intend. Fear. Panic. Confusion. His quirk factor crackled, warped, and for the first time in his life, Katsuki's control slipped. A surge of raw power, more power than he had released since the entrance exam, burst from his palm in a blinding flash. For those in the blast radius, it was the first horrifying moment where the thought surfaced. Have we been supporting a hothead with no control all this time? A few students managed to cover their ears with their hands before the boom hit. Most didn't. The pressure wave rolled over the courtyard like a shock front, knocking bodies to the ground, scraping skin, shredding loose papers, rattling lockers as distant staff jerked toward the windows. The two at the center of the blast reacted very differently. Bakugo Katsuki hardly flinched at the light or the sound. His enhanced senses, physicality, and durability kept him on his feet barely, but even that wasn't enough to stop the jolt of pain screaming through his arm. His palm throbbed, bruised, and not from the explosion. It felt like he had punched a concrete wall. Midoriya Izuku did not fare so well. He was launched, truly launched, across the courtyard, slamming into the stone siding of the decorative fountain wall with enough force to crack the surface. Dust and rubble shook loose, cascading around him in a choking cloud. A dozen thoughts rippled through the courtyard, scattered across panicked minds. Why did Bakugo use an explosion that big? What did Deku do now? Is he dead? When could Bakugo make such explosions? Someone call an ambulance. I can't hear. Why can't I hear? Katsuki stared at his hand, breath ragged, expression slack with disbelief. The bruise forming across his palm deepened with a sick realization he hadn't hit flesh. He had hit something harder. Izuku's thoughts were different. Unbroken. Razor-sharp. Colder than the winter air. Clearer than anything he'd ever felt, even clearer than the heat of the shower. Time stretched thin. Sound dulled. Movement slowed. The world folded itself into a single, perfect awareness, edges defined like lines on a page. Students approached the crater of dust with hesitant steps. Someone shouted for the staff. Someone else called emergency services. And for a heartbeat, the courtyard was nothing but ringing silence. Until the rubble shifted. A single scrape of stone against stone. Conversation choked to stillness mid-breath. Bakugo's eyes widened, pupils pinprick small. The dust pile moved again. Someone was standing back up. A final chunk of stone clattered to the ground as Izuku's silhouette pushed through the settling dust. For a heartbeat, all anyone could see was a human outline, small, uneven, listing slightly. Only the sound of sharp, even breathing for just a few moments filled the air. Then the dust thinned. And someone in the crowd screamed. His shirt, what remained of it, hung in ribbons off his shoulders. The second layer was shredded too, barely clinging to him in scraps of fabric that kept just enough dignity to avoid total humiliation. His scarf and beanie were torn to threads. His pants weren't much better. They expected blood. Burns. Bone. Something normal. Instead, the left side of him looked wrong. Skin clung tight over bones from a week of starving himself and a week of a coma, ribs jutting out sharply. But worse, far worse, was the stain of matte, inky black spreading across his torso. A tar-dark lattice ran from his right hip up to his left shoulder, as if something had spilled beneath his skin and hardened there like some black carapace. Splashes of the black matter peppered his back where the stone had torn him open. More traced his neck, little crawling flecks like soot fused into flesh. Every student froze. Even Bakugo. The blonde stared at the boy he had grown up with, bullied, tormented, pushed, shaped into silence under the misguided belief that Midoriya would only ever get himself killed and barely managed to duck before the punch shattered through the space his head had been. The air screamed around Izuku's fist. He threw another one straight into Bakugo's gut. Katsuki's muscles tensed to absorb the blow, but Izuku followed through with his entire body weight behind it. A wet choking gasp tore from Bakugo's chest. Izuku didn't stop. A third punch slammed into the blonde's ribs. There was no crack of bone, surprisingly, but the hit sent Katsuki spinning, the torque carrying him into a desperate counterkick powered by the roar of a boom. His heel smashed into the side of Izuku's head, the explosion-laced blow jarring the green-haired boy's skull. Pain flared sharp, bright, but distant. Muted. Izuku grabbed the leg before Katsuki could pull it back. One arm locked around the calf. His other hand slid up, palm pressing just above the knee. Then he twisted. One push on the femur. One pull on the fibula. Another second, another inch. And the joint would have dislocated. Before the sound of tearing ligaments could erupt, something flared through Bakugo's body: heat, raw power, a pulse of strength he had barely tapped into before in the last few months. His muscles seized and forced Izuku's hold open. Katsuki dropped to the ground and immediately swung up with a detonating hook. The punch landed. The explosion followed. Izuku flew into the fountain wall again, stone cracking under the force. No one could step in. No one even tried. No one was fast enough. Izuku was already moving. He came out of the dust bleeding black, looking like a feral beast wrought from a nightmare and utterly focused. The cuts on his back, the split-open cheek leaking tar-like blood, the bruises spreading across his ribs that went from purple to yellow then to black in moments. None of it registered. He threw another punch, pivoted, and snapped into a spinning kick, an exact imitation of a Mirko video he'd watched a single time, years ago. His body moved with precision beyond instinct. Something inside him went cold. Cold enough to make his blood thicken. Cold enough to make his muscles surge with a strange, icy strength. Cold enough to leech away the heat burning in his mind. A flickering realization brushed him: he was fighting Bakugo to hurt him. A flicker of satisfaction cut through the fog at the sight of blood on Katsuki's lip and the stunned look in his eyes. Bakugo caught his incoming punch barely. But the pivot kick had already committed. It landed. Katsuki hit the ground hard, skidding and rolling several feet, coughing as he fought for breath. Izuku lunged to close the distance, cold creeping over his thoughts, calculating the angle. Under the left ribs, strike to the liver, guaranteed to drop him. A blast hit him dead center. It blew him backward, boots scraping helplessly across the concrete as a wave of dust surged up behind him like a rising curtain. The pavement tore beneath his heels, leaving a carved trail as his body finally slammed to a stop. For one heartbeat, everything rang. Then, clarity snapped back into him like a hammer striking glass. Heat surged up his spine in a violent pulse, sharpening the world into brutal focus. And this time, the pain didn't stay muted. It roared. The flesh across his chest, already blackened from earlier, was torn open in blistering, scab-cracked ridges, weeping thick, inky blood that oozed slow and cold. Bakugo staggered upright, chest heaving, sweat and smoke rising off his arms in waves. His pupils were blown wide, his breath ragged, half adrenaline, half fear he refused to acknowledge. Izuku rolled to his own feet. Slow. Deliberate. Calculating. A new plan formed instantly. He wasn't going to win this. Not like this. Not in the cold. Every breath siphoned more heat off him than the explosion had given. His wounds, the black ones, felt frigid, dragging the warmth out of him like open doors in winter. And though they were repairing in real time, he could feel how much harder each one hit his reserves. The first explosion had merely replaced flesh with that obsidian material. These new wounds taxed him deeply. So, adjust. He reached down, grabbed a sizable shard of broken stone from the courtyard floor, and flung it at Katsuki's forehead with surgical precision. It reached the blonde faster than he could process. Bakugo barely got a hand up in time. The stone hit his palm, split the skin, and clipped across his brow, tearing a thin line of red. He staggered from the momentum. "I'm done," Izuku said. The words echoed across the courtyard, flat, exhausted, cold. Izuku stood fully, swaying once as he found his balance. That was cathartic. "But I think I'm done. You owe me a new shirt. And pants." Katsuki's face contorted confusion, shock, then pure rage sweeping in to fill the cracks. "The F, you mean you're done, you idiot?" he snarled, voice climbing. "We are not done here, Izuku." He grabbed the stone he'd blocked with trembling fingers and hurled it back. It struck Izuku's cheek, a sharp, cutting impact. A thick bead of black blood slid down Izuku's jaw, cold and viscous, steaming in the chilly air. Izuku didn't flinch. "Yes, we are." He brushed the blood away, leaving a dark smear across the back of his hand. Unless you want a strike on your record. Which I know you don't. Bakugo froze. Just for a breath. Just long enough for the implication to land. Izuku continued, voice flat and eerily steady, I am leaving before anyone with authority arrives. I think you can convince everyone here that it was just a misunderstanding. You know. His eyes lifted slightly narrow, sharp, venomous. Like Halloween. The words landed like a blade. Bakugo's jaw locked. His hands shook not from power, but from something far more unstable. Izuku didn't wait. He scanned the wrecked courtyard, found what remained of his backpack a strapless, scorched amputee of its former self and bent to grab it by the small surviving handle. All I ask is a new shirt, he said quietly. You probably have enough spares anyway. He turned. The crowd instinctively parted for him. And Izuku Midoriya bloody, blackened, freezing, and furious walked away from the explosion site without looking back, while Katsuki Bakugo stood frozen in the smoking ruins of his own making. A siren wailed in the distance. But Izuku was already running. The world blurred into cold shapes and sharper breaths. More things seemed to flicker in and out of his mind with every step, like thoughts half frozen suddenly thawing into clarity. The sheer cold strength that had bitten into his flesh earlier, the way his thoughts had snapped into action, all of it melted from frost into slush, then into painfully clear water. And as soon as it thawed completely, he was hit hard with the reality of what the hell had just happened. Not his cold mind's version of it. Not that detached, directive-driven perspective. His mind, as Izuku took over again. And he realized. He had fought Bakugo Katsuki. And survived. More than survived. He had pushed back. Forced Bakugo to defend. Even landed blows he had no right to land. Though the truth stayed the same. He lost. Badly. But it had been far, far closer than it ever should have been. He could admit that the matchup was utter hell. Izuku only ever got stronger with heat shoved into his system, while Bakugo, whose body pumped out nitroglycerin when hot, only grew stronger the hotter he burned. A miserable symmetry. But despite that, there were oddities. Things that didn't fit. Izuku skidded to a stop. He spun around, breath fogging slightly as he checked behind him, expecting Bakugo, a teacher, someone, anyone to have followed. Nothing. At least, nothing he registered. His eyes swept the street cold, empty, washed in the muted hum of distant chaos, completely missing the faint movement of a figure slipping out of sight across a far-off rooftop. Gone in an instant. Silent. Watching. Izuku saw none of it. All he heard was the echo of sirens and the far-off muttering of panicked students carried on the wind. He ducked into a narrow alley, pressed himself behind a dumpster, and dropped his ruined bag to the concrete. His fingers trembled as he unzipped the large pocket. Beneath torn notebooks and bent textbooks, he found what he needed: his gym clothes, forced into the bag that morning since PE had switched to classroom work for the final weeks. He crouched low and changed, shivering violently as the cold leached into him like nails against his bones, pulling the heat out of him faster and faster, thinning his clarity with every breath. Right. The oddities. 1. His quirk definitely did more than he had initially observed. The healing alone was absurd. Useful. Terrifying. Every wound he'd taken, some deep, some burning, had sealed over already. The blackened skin across his torso glistened faintly under the falling afternoon light, glossy like obsidian, cracked like lava stone. Wrong. Alien. Alive. 2. Something was wrong with Bakugo's quirk control. He replayed the sequence in his head with sickening clarity. The first explosion. It hadn't been normal. Too large. Too hot. Too uncontrolled. Izuku had seen the expression on Katsuki's face afterward: confusion, shock even. The kick explosion had been cleaner, tighter. The blasts after that were back to his usual range. An evolution? A mutation? A malfunction? Izuku wasn't sure. But the surge had been real. 3. Bakugo's rib definitely should have snapped. He had felt it. He had put his entire weight behind the punch, felt the muscle give. But the bone held. Izuku felt a flicker of something hot and ugly in his chest at that memory. A spark of satisfaction. Of pleasure. Seeing Katsuki lose his breath, even for a heartbeat. It lanced through him like a needle, quick, bright, sharp, then vanished, iced out instantly as a shiver tore down his spine. The cold was fully back. Perfect timing. He finished pulling the gym shirt over his head, breathing hard, chest aching beneath the blackened patches of skin. He zipped the ruined bag closed, shivering violently now. He needed heat. The faster the better. And whatever came next. Whatever version of himself he had to face it with. He'd deal with it. A part of him had already accepted that. Already grown, disturbingly accustomed to this new pattern. Quirks always changed the bearer. That was basic biology. Mutation. Adaptation. Identity drift. So why was he surprised that it was happening to him? He wasn't. Not really. He exhaled softly, and the sky's looming presence a crushing dome that had earlier clawed at every instinct he had dulled in the span of a few seconds. Fear bled out of him like steam. Replaced by calm. Deep, steady, unnatural calm. He had to keep moving. Keep following the plan. Directive 3, find something to train with. Preferably metal. Guns were unrealistic, too dangerous, too illegal, too tied to the kind of people he didn't want to brush shoulders with. A pawnshop might yield a knife, a pipe wrench, a bat, or something practical. But his clarity shifted the plan. The pawnshop was still on the list. But it was no longer first. If he went through the industrial district, he might find scrap piles, metal dumps, and abandoned tools. Cheap. Accessible. Unsupervised. A small sigh left him hot, then cold across his teeth. Wait. He blinked. The drip, drip, drip? He could feel it now. That slow heat loss he'd been monitoring all morning, it timed itself with his breathing. Each exhale drained him. Tiny amounts, but noticeable. Interesting. He filed the observation away, thumb already flicking across his phone screen as he began walking, pulling up maps, local dumps, salvage locations, anything with metal. 3 options surfaced. 1. Takoba Municipal Beach Park. Bordering the industrial district, half of its shoreline was buried under trash, runoff, and illegal dumping. People abandoned everything there, from appliances to rusted tools to things they didn't want found. 2. 5 blocks of condemned warehouses. Forgotten factories, emptied when the city shifted production north. Abandoned. Unwatched. Dangerous. Perfect. 3. An auto parts yard owned by the Hatsum family. Highly rated, full of scrap metal, old engines, broken frames. Closer to home. Last on the route. Izuku clicked his tongue thoughtfully. Start farthest. Work back toward safety. Takoba first. With luck, someone had dumped a metal bat. Maybe even something better, an old crowbar, a pipe, anything that could be used to build strength, precision, or muscle memory. The auto parts yard could wait until the end. Engine parts would make for good weights. He adjusted course, boots crunching on pavement as he turned toward the coastline. Directive 4 echoed quietly in his mind. Make it home safe. Shower. Highest heat setting. Stay until clarity returns. Before that, observe. Write everything down now. Then again, later, when warm. 2 states. 2 mindsets. 2 sets of data. If the differences were consistent, he'd know something real was happening inside him. He hated how comfortable he already was with the idea. Hated how this quirk, if that's what it was, had slid into him like a thief and rearranged his instincts before he even knew to fight it. Yet he didn't truly hate it. Not the clarity. Not the control. He only resented the ease. It sat in his throat like a lump of bile. He tightened his grip on his shredded bag and kept walking, cold leaching at his edges, heat dripping away in steady, tiny losses with every breath, yet his focus stayed razor-sharp. Takoba awaited. And if he wanted daylight left when he got there, he had to move. He picked up the pace. His shoes, the only part of his outfit that hadn't been replaced after the fight, hit the pavement hard. What used to be bright red fabric was now smoke-blackened, charred around the toes. The laces were half-burned, tied together in a sad, barely holding knot. Maybe he'd find a pair of less dead shoes. Somewhere along the way. Unlikely. But worth keeping an eye out. The path was long, even with shortcuts. The GPS never knew about the narrow alleyways, the half-finished construction paths, or the broken fences students used to cut through districts. He could have taken the subway, but something in him rejected the idea like a bad taste on his tongue. Another thing to test when warm. Does the cold state alter risk assessment? Does it make crowds feel more dangerous? Does it push him toward isolation? He turned sharply left, catching sight of a minor hero skirmish between a thug and a patrol hero. His instincts screamed to stop, observe, take notes, analyze, but his directives held stronger. Ignore it. Focus. Task first. His mind clicked forward like pieces on a board. Maybe that was why he didn't want the subway. Because he was stronger. Not metaphorically. Literally. His muscles felt good. Alive. Efficient. Before today, running full speed for half as long would have knocked him to his knees, lungs burning, throat raw, legs shaking. Now? He wasn't even winded. It had to be the regeneration. The way his skin had transformed replaced itself with that inky, lightless black tissue whenever damaged. Would all of him eventually turn that color? Would it spread inch by inch across his whole body? His face had shed the black scar only after rest. His back was nearly covered. Even small wounds turned black within seconds now. Would he become inexhaustible, with enough heat? Could he try a multi-day all-nighter and see how long it took before failure? Did he burn less heat while asleep? All good theories. All worth testing. Before Izuku truly registered the passage of time, long after his mind had slowed under the creeping weight of cold, his shoes finally began to give out. The constant impact of his unnaturally strong strides tore the soles apart. Rubber peeled back, fabric frayed, each step threatening to expose skin through worn canvas. Quirkless shoes weren't made for this. For power. For speed. For anything but ordinary use. He slowed only when a sharp tang of salt touched his tongue. The ocean. Izuku's eyes lifted. For the briefest moment, that prickling sensation of being watched slid icy fingers up his spine. A phantom gaze from somewhere too high, too distant, too quiet. He turned. Nothing. No movement. No silhouette. He shoved it down. The stone seawall came into view, towering, weathered, built decades ago to protect what was left of Takoba from storm tides and industrial runoff. The stairs dropped sharply toward the beach below. Izuku descended. And stopped halfway. Because Takoba Beach, once a sprawling dump of rusted appliances, smashed refrigerators, stolen cars, broken metal piping, and mountains of unidentifiable trash, was clean. Not improved. Not partially cleared. Clean. The dunes he remembered from old photos, towering heaps of trash half buried in sand, were gone. Entire dunes were carved cleanly in half, like someone had taken a colossal blade and scooped them out down to the deepest recesses of the sand. The beach spread out empty, only beach and waves as far as the eye could see. Scoured. The only signs of disruption were odd depressions in the surf zone, hundreds of shallow cone-shaped divots peppering the shoreline, where waves pooled and sat, rippling into strange spirals before rejoining the tide. Like something large and heavy had plunged into the sand over and over. Or like someone used a quirk to blast divots into the surf itself. Izuku stared. Takoba had been famous for being unfixable. Decades of trash. Even municipal heroes refused cleanup duties here. The last official survey had called it irrecoverable. And now? A pristine expanse of sand and water. Not natural. Not accidental. Someone had done this. Recently. Quietly. Likely a training exercise for some hero or hero-to-be. It would explain the divots in the sand and the unnatural mounds of sand. A spark of irritation bloomed in his chest, brief, sharp, swallowed quickly by the cold. Takoba had been his best shot at finding scrap. Metal. Tools. Anything. Instead? Perfect emptiness. A waste of precious time. He exhaled slowly, redirecting his mind. The condemned warehouses were next. 5 decaying blocks of forgotten factories, rust-eaten pipes, and stone structures likely used more for villain hideouts than industry. If anywhere had usable metal, it would be there. He turned back toward the road and collided with a tall, thin man walking by, eyes glued to his phone. The impact was small. Yet Izuku staggered. Strong, he realized automatically. Stronger than his build suggested. A quirk, probably. The blond man muttered a distracted, sorry, barely looking up. Izuku bowed out of habit, taking in the man's loose, baggy clothes, messy hair, and the strange way he carried himself, like someone both exhausted and humming with energy. He opened his mouth to apologize, but the man was already gone, swallowed back into the city flow. Izuku turned. And ran. Body snapping into a full sprint on the very next step. The shredded remains of his shoes split further with each strike of pavement. Takoba had been a dead end. But the city still had places to search. And for Izuku Midoriya, running on instinct, directives, and a mind stripped to nearly just essential machinery, the travel time vanished in stuttering jumps of full awareness. His thoughts were empty and full all at once. A single track. A single purpose. He didn't notice how fast he was moving. Didn't notice when the last scraps of his shoes shredded apart. Didn't notice when he had to yank the burned, brittle laces with a hooked finger until the ruined footwear peeled from him like dead skin. Bare feet hit concrete. And nothing hurt. No sting from the gravel. No slice from loose nails or broken glass. No flinch from crushed chunks of cinderblock biting into the soles of his feet. His skin should have broken instantly. Should have bled. Should have stung. But within minutes, his feet darkened completely. Toe to heel, a smooth sheet of inky black that swallowed the city grime whole. His breath came in sharp, short gasps. And then simply stopped. Stopped. His lungs froze in place like organs sculpted out of ice. The alarm bell in his mind rang loud. You're not breathing. 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 You're not. But the panic couldn't penetrate the cold. Fear formed, but it came out frostbitten, thin, brittle, distant. He slowed only when the first warehouse loomed ahead, fences rising 8 feet tall and crowned with razor wire. Bitterness flared sharp, familiar, almost comforting in how unchanged it was. Then he climbed. Not gracefully. Not carefully. Just efficiently. He grabbed the razor wire with a bare hand and pulled. Metal snapped, shrieking under the force. 3 more strands followed, tearing free as easily as thorns from a dead branch. Pain hit. A strange hybrid of salt on a cut. An ice packed tightly around his bones. And pins pricking skin through cloth. Thick black liquid streaked the razors where it tore from his palm. Tiny scraps of his old skin clung to the metal. He vaulted the final line of fencing, landing lightly on the other side. Spray-painted gang symbols marked the walls. Robot faces, stylized dogs, dozens of cats, words snarled across stone in English, Mandarin, and something he couldn't identify. Izuku searched the warehouse in a mechanical sweep bottom to top. Stairs creaked under unnatural speed. Each floor turned up nothing but debris and rot. First building, nothing. Second, nothing. Third, rotted shelves and empty crates. Fourth, a rusted pipe useless except as a desperate last resort. It wasn't until the 5th structure, smallest, forgotten, almost swallowed by dusk, that he found anything worth using. A dented metal baseball bat. A bent strip of steel wide enough to wrap over his knuckles like a crude set of brass knuckles. Both crude weapons. Both usable. Both were perfect for someone with durability that bordered on absurd. They would do. But as he held them, his mind listed the problems like inventory. He was massively behind everyone else. Years behind in physical training. Years behind in quirk experience. Years behind in understanding how to use even the smallest spark of power. All he had was analysis. And the frighteningly fast cognition his quirk allowed when warm. His strongest trait, and the one he already feared, was that cold, locked-in state where he processed everything and felt nothing. He tossed the bat once, watching it spin end over end. Caught it cleanly. Slid it beneath the ruined straps of his backpack and knotted what remained into something that might hold. His mind, unbidden, unwanted, offered new directives. Plans. Number 1. Join a dojo. A gym. A quirk gym. Train every waking moment from now until the UA Sports Festival. Force the school to transfer him into the hero course. Number 2. The same as above but faster, harsher, more dangerous. Learn by fighting villains after dark. A vigilante. Logical. Efficient. Stupid. He didn't reject it. His bare, blackened feet hit concrete again as he slipped through another fence and into the street. No one was watching. Not that he could see. He turned toward his final location. Hatsum Auto Parts and Salvage, known among hobbyists as one of the best dumps in the district. Full of scrap metal. Old engine blocks. Broken frames. And, more importantly, close to home. He ran. Cold ate at him relentlessly, gnawing at the edges of his thoughts with every breath he didn't take. What little warmth lingered inside him bled out with each step. But his focus stayed razor-sharp. He had directives to follow. Night was coming. And perhaps the most important, unspoken directive, the one wedged deep behind all the others, was simple. Don't make Mom worry. By the time he reached Hatsum Auto Parts and Salvage, the sun hovered low over the horizon, smearing the sky in bruised orange and tired red. The light bounced off the concrete lot in a way that eased something behind Izuku's eyes, like a hand briefly smoothing down the agitation in his skull. He reached the door, hesitated, then pushed it open. A bell chimed, a soft metallic ding echoing into a cavern of organized chaos. The heat hit him first. Not just warm, oppressively hot, thick like a workshop furnace left running for hours. The kind of heat that would make a normal person flinch or wipe their brow. Izuku felt the chill in his bones loosen just slightly. Inside was an industrial labyrinth. Floor-to-ceiling shelves choked with bottles of coolant, tubs of grease, oil cans, neon chemical jugs, spray lubricants, and fluids he couldn't begin to identify. The air smelled of metal, rust, engine oil, hot rubber, and faint ozone, like a mechanic's dream and a safety inspector's nightmare. Further back, massive bins overflowed with parts. Engine blocks stacked like ancient stone altars, twisted crankshafts, rusted mufflers, half-disassembled transmissions, wire harnesses coiled like sleeping serpents. Gears and pistons, sorted into labeled crates, were definitely older than Izuku. Books, actual books, thick and oil-stained, lined the wall behind the counter, cataloging every part in the building and the salvage yard outside. And behind that counter sat a man. Was generous. He loomed even while sitting. He was built like a refrigerator, with arms broad, tall, and solid. Bald head gleaming with sweat from the heat, but sporting a truly magnificent mustache that looked like it belonged on the face of a retired pro wrestler or a cartoon general. His eyebrows were bushy enough to qualify as small woodland creatures. He glanced up. Just once. A flick of dark eyes acknowledging Izuku's presence, and then returned to flipping a page in a thick, grease-marked book with black-stained fingers. Izuku stepped fully inside. The door shut behind him with a soft click, and the oppressive warmth wrapped around him like a heavy blanket. The cold in his spine began to unwind slowly, but noticeably. He let out a shaky breath, feeling his lungs relax for the first time in what was most likely over 3 hours at this point, before skiing in a short breath of the warmer air. A trickle of heat crawled up the back of his neck. His mind sharpened, the cold glass defrosted enough for him to zero in on how wrong everything inside of him was beginning to feel. Yet he could stare at that wrongness and feel nothing beyond a slight tremor in his hand. Another quick breath, another moment of loitering in front of the door. A part of him wanted to browse the wares in their entirety. Sadly, he didn't have the luxury of browsing within his time frame. Not tonight. He needed something he could train with. Something simple. Durable. Metal, preferably. And he needed to get home before his mother returned because no amount of hot water could save him from that level of panic. He scanned the aisles quickly. Scrap metal. Broken pipes. Rebar lengths. Dented crowbars. A rack of cheap, rust-kissed wrenches sturdy enough to brain an all-might. Cut out. Good. The question now was cost, speed, and concealability. He stepped deeper into the store, eyes darting over bins and hooks and shelves with mechanical precision. His fingers twitched with the urge to touch everything, test weight, balance, density, but he held himself still. He had minutes, maybe less. His mom got off late on a normal day, but there were the events of the last few weeks to take into account. And if she came home to an empty apartment, hours after school had ended, and his body not seated at his desk or in the kitchen. Cold fear crawled up his spine. Not sharp. Not panicked. Just cold. Clear. He had to be fast. So he approached the counter. And, for the first time, the mustached mountain looked up again properly this time. Dull, brass-colored eyes locked onto Izuku's with a hardness that couldn't be imitated by even the most brutal men. The dark bags painted beneath them told Izuku more than he needed to know about this man, tired, worn thin, carved down to the bone by years behind that counter. Izuku's mind flicked through every detail in the space between the man's blink. He caught the man's eyes darting to the right toward a small control pad bolted crookedly to the wall. The shop's AC unit blinked twice before clicking on, the temperature having dipped 4 degrees under the stubbornly set 80. Then their eyes met again. How much is it for? Minors must be accompanied by an adult of some kind for any transactions, the man said. His voice had the texture of lithium grease, low, thick, and exhausted. Oh. Izuku's brain stuttered, catching on itself before restarting. I just wanted to know how much one of those dented engine blocks outside is. The man shifted, apparently, even in all that towering bulk, he'd been sitting. He rose from the stool he had half eclipsed and dragged a small booklet from under the counter without ever looking down. Depends on which one, he said. The small 4-cylinder with the split running down the length will run you about 266,670.98 yen. But that's only like half the price of a fully usable engine block. Yes. Because nobody buys an engine block pre-damaged unless it's for some strange and esoteric reason. I just need something heavier than my weights to lift, Izuku said quickly. And getting something like this seemed more reasonable than buying dozens of different weights. The man didn't even look up. What about adjustable weights? The multi-plate ones you can switch out. Heat flushed Izuku's cheeks warm even against the cold he was feeling both internally and externally. Why hadn't he thought of that? The directives, maybe? Or maybe he was just a bit stupid. I didn't think of that. The man let out something between a sniff, a chuckle, and a noise of pure annoyance. Mum, he grunted, sliding the booklet back under the counter. Sorry for the inconvenience, sir. Izuku bowed quickly twice before turning and practically fleeing. He slipped out into the cold with one last breath of warm air, feeling it sink into his bones as the door clicked shut behind him. He started circling the shop, already drifting toward the pawn shop in his mind. Adjustable weights. Right. That was the directive now. He didn't notice the shift in the air until it was already too late. One of the thick, grease-slick metal gates exploded open fast and slammed straight into him. The impact knocked him flat onto the concrete. Cold bit through his clothes the moment his back hit the ground, the shock traveling up his spine like a crack of winter. But no panic rose. No confusion. Just a single, flat thought? Great. Now I'll be late to the pawn shop. Oh my. I didn't see you there, short stuff. The sky above him darkened then vanished entirely, eclipsed by a pair of brass gold eyes, bright as polished trumpet metal. They hovered above him, wide and unashamedly curious, framed by a head of pink dreadlocks that swung around her face like playful, wriggling tentacles. Sorry about that, she added, leaning over him with far too much enthusiasm for someone who had just assaulted him with a gate. But I have a few questions about how you did that. I'm sorry? Izuku managed from the floor. His voice came out thinner than he hoped, breath puffing visibly in the air even though it wasn't cold enough for anyone else to do that. He shifted up to sit as the girl stepped back, giving him just enough room to move but barely enough space to stand without bumping into her again. He opened his mouth to say he needed to go, but his lips weren't fast enough. Apology accepted, she chirped, hands landing on her hips. You walked out right before I could get to you, so I had to cut you off as soon as I could. She grinned, leaning forward in a way that made Izuku's shoulders tighten. So how did you do it? I'm not sure what you're talking about, Izuku said, brow creasing. I don't think I did anything in there, and anyway. But you did, she cut in sharply, jabbing a finger toward his nose. As soon as you stepped inside, the ambient temperature dropped 2 degrees, and the heater had to kick up its output. Then, when you and my dad were talking. Dad? That part barely even registered before she barreled on. It dropped another 2 degrees. And then, when you left, it fell 3 more almost instantly. So, were you using your quirk? Does it constantly absorb heat? Do you need a baby? Izuku almost choked. A sputter clawed up his throat as shock flooded through him, stiff and icy. The girl leaned in closer, way too close, her eyes narrowing to microscopic points as she scanned his face like she was reverse engineering it. Because if you want a baby, we can make some. I feel like I'm thinking the wrong thing when you say baby, Izuku managed, cheeks burning hotter than his quirk ever let him get. The embarrassment he'd felt in the shop barely even qualified compared to whatever this was. But I don't think I know you nearly well enough. You're a funny guy, she cut in, grinning widely. I meant inventions. You told my dad you needed weights, right? I can make you the best weights in the world, custom, balanced, ergonomic, CC, but only if you help me. Her smile was too sweet for how intensely her eyes were studying his face. So it was your quirk, right? I think so. You think so? Yeah, I think so. So you think so? Yes. Cool. She clapped once, like that solved everything. So listen. I've got a small problem, my dad says is a hazard to the shop, his words, not mine. But that problem goes away instantly if you happen to be heat resistant and able to disperse energy. Say, for a few hours a day. In the back. Where he can't see. Her eyes hooked onto his with laser-tight focus. In exchange, I'll make you the weights. All the weights. I'll even make you a full-body weight suit if you help me long enough. She took a breath, and when she exhaled, a thin mist puffed into the air between them. Izuku felt it drift over his skin. Cold. Too cold for the actual temperature outside. She noticed that too, her gaze flicking down to follow the strange fog between them. Izuku's mind spun, gears clattering, slipping, racing. Then something clicked. He grabbed the fence beside him and hauled himself to his feet, the cold concrete grit sticking faintly to his palms. He had time. He had the directive. And she was the mechanic giant's daughter. That counted for something. You're the daughter of the mechanic giant, and you're offering to make me things in exchange for me, absorbing heat? Yes, she said, completely unashamed. How is the heat produced? Mostly small fires. Some explosions. Medium explosions. My dad calls them preventable, but that's unfair. Anyway, if you don't think you can handle it, I understand. No, I should be fine. I've already had experiences with explosions, and I came out fine. Oh. Wonderful, she beamed, bouncing on her heels. Is tomorrow good? I need to finish my project for the UA support course entrance exam, and if I blow up one more thing, my dad might relegate me to the alley behind the shop. Which is not suitable for baby making. Izuku blinked hard. Yeah, I can do tomorrow. I should be free. What time? I'll text you. But you don't have my. She shoved her phone into his hand so fast he almost dropped it. Her contact screen was already open. She'd filled in his name as short stuff, and under company, she'd written, expert thermodynamic expansion assistant. Izuku stared at the contact entry, speechless. Then he typed in his number and added his actual name to the notes field just in case she needed it. Here you go. He handed her phone back and reached for his backpack, lifting it by the jerry-rigged baseball bat strap he'd cobbled together. The girl's eyebrows twitched upward at the contraption, but she didn't comment. Instead, she tugged her overalls higher, a faint shiver running through her shoulders despite the lingering heat of the day. I gotta head home. My mom might be back soon. His voice sounded strange even to him, thin, uncertain, rusty. It had been years since he'd said something so normal to another person. See you tomorrow. The words felt foreign in his mouth, like something borrowed from a previous life back when Quirkless hadn't become both his nickname and his obituary. Yes. We're gonna make tons of babies, the pink-haired girl declared, loud enough that half the street turned to stare. A pair of businessmen blinked at them in synchronized confusion before hurrying away as if the conversation might be contagious. Yeah. His reply was wasted breath, she was already grabbing the gate and hauling it shut. See you tomorrow, short stuff, she sang, and the gate clanged closed, the interior latch locking with a sharp click. Well, that was strange. Izuku exhaled and turned on his heel. He started walking, then jogging, then sprinting, body warming from the motion but mind slipping back into its familiar cold. At least he could skip the pawn shop. The auto shop hadn't been a bust after all. And if she kept her end of the deal, he'd get more out of this than he'd hoped. Left, right, right. He weaved through streets he knew by instinct, cutting through alleyways, hopping cracks in the sidewalk, slipping between main roads to shave off precious seconds. A chill clung to him no matter how fast he ran, the heat of the day never quite sank into his skin. By the time he reached home and unlocked the front door, he'd mapped out half a dozen possible schedules for tomorrow. He went straight to his room. The ruined bag hit the mattress with a soft thud. He pulled out a notebook from the trash can and a pen, then dropped into the chair at his desk, letting the motion carry him down in one smooth fall. He flipped through worn pages, past old scribbles and half-erased theories, until he reached a blank space. He began to write. Quirk notes. Regeneration. Heat-based. More damage equals more heat loss. Injuries caused by heat seem to drain disproportionately. Black material of skin and blood, odd consistency, unknown composition at a glance, thicker when cold. Heat. Heat appears to be the primary energy source. Quirk likely falls under the compiler subtype. However, physical mutation indicates either transformation or mutator aspects of it. Not uncommon for a late awakening quirk to merge categories. Theory. Why I was so tired. Why waking from the coma took a week, even after physical healing had already completed, heat loss to an extreme degree. It feels correct, my body recovers, but my mind struggles. Heat seems to be, as far as I can tell, consubstantial with my own life essence. Losing heat is losing me. Thought processes. Cold state thoughts singular, linear, rigid. Hyperfocused to the point of suffocation. Heat state thoughts closer to baseline cognition. Topics shift rapidly with improved clarity, less fear. Easier to return to and conclude observations. Unsettling implication. The part of me that feels human only returns with warmth. The colder I get, the more the world narrows until only one thought survives. I may not be the same person today that I was yesterday. It is horrifyingly possible I may not be the same tomorrow as I am today. A week from now, I may not resemble Izuku Midoriya at all in thought, in instinct, in want. Every day feels like a fork in the road that I'm too numb to choose. I simply slide down whichever path the cold pushes me toward. The logic threaded through every thought feels inhuman. Not evil. Just empty. A machine's answer to a human problem. Below all the cold and heat, I am afraid. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a way anyone would notice. But in the quiet sense that something fundamental is slipping. And no one but me seems aware of it. I want to tell Mom. But logically, that would only worry her. And if she worries, I've failed. Directive, do not make Mom worry again. Oddly enough, I know this wasn't my original directive. The first one faded. Maybe I erased it. Maybe the cold did. There is no urgency to restore it. This version is cleaner. More efficient. Covers more situations. If I can help her, I will rather than try. If I can reduce her worry, I must, even if that reduction requires removing myself from the equation. This thought returned 3 times. Cold state. I am recording it because ignoring it feels dishonest to leave out. He set the pen down. His fingers trembled not from fear, but from the cold logic still clinging to them like frost. He stood, stretched his arms overhead, and headed for the bathroom. A few stray tears leaked from his eyes and rolled down his cheeks. He wiped them away without thought, like they were simply another bodily function he didn't need to process. The light flicked on. He locked the door. He grabbed the hem of his shirt and stripped it off, pausing at the odd realization that even after hours of running around, not a single drop of sweat. His shirt was bone dry. His skin was cool. Another benefit, maybe, he thought in that flat, cold tone. Then he stepped in front of the mirror. He stared. And the thing staring back looked wrong. An unsettling mixture of flesh and something else, something black and creeping. His back was almost fully consumed, the dark material meeting in arching, webbed patterns across his spine. His chest followed. His arms were mismatched stripes of pale skin and deep black that crept further each hour. His hands were fully changed, from fingertips to wrists. His neck was gaining a smoky darkness around the collarbones like storm clouds gathering under the skin. It was taking over. Piece by piece. Quietly. Without pain. Without permission. He stripped fully and turned on the hot water. The steam hit the room before the mirror had time to fog up, but droplets were already forming on his skin. Condensation beaded across him instantly, clinging to him as though the heat was being stolen out of every drifting molecule of air. Izuku ignored it. He watched his own eyes in the mirror as the edges began to fog. As cold state clarity loosened. As something warmer, sharper, more alive pushed up from beneath. He stepped into the shower. The hot water struck him like a bomb. And then immediately, like a hammer. The moment the heat hit him fully, something inside him broke loose. The cold thought shattered. The heat thought flooded in. He collapsed to his knees as the scalding water pelted down like molten rain. His breath left him in a sharp gasp. His mind so rigid, so compressed burst open all at once, scenes slamming into him with brutal, unfiltered clarity. Everything he'd pushed down all day. Everything he'd ignored. Everything that should have hurt and had been neatly boxed away by cold logic. Came roaring back in a single catastrophic swing of the pendulum. His cheek tearing open under his own teeth. The fountain stone slamming into his back. The blast, the indescribable moment when his torso folded inward, organs burning, lungs charring black before knitting themselves together into something that wasn't lungs anymore. Punches thrown until bone cracked and fingers blackened. Razor wire tearing palms down to the bone, each pull carving deep grooves into him until the wire snapped. All of it. All at once. No buffer. No numbness. Just raw memory and pain hitting so fast it felt like drowning. Izuku gagged as vomit forced its way up his throat, black, thick, bitter cold. It splattered onto the tile and washed toward the drain, dispersing in dark swirls in the steaming water. He watched it circle away. Just like his thoughts kept circling, circling, circling. Jeplaying every moment of the day, every moment of pain, every moment where he should have cried or screamed or stopped. But he hadn't. Because the cold had decided those things were unnecessary. The heat, now, showed him exactly how wrong that was. He watched it circle away. A dark spiral swallowed by the drain. Just like his thoughts kept circling, circling, circling. Replaying every moment of the day, every moment of pain, every moment where he should have cried or screamed or stopped. But he hadn't. Because the cold had decided those things were unnecessary. And the heat, the sudden, violent rush of it showed him exactly how wrong that was. Something cracked inside him. Not a bone. Something quieter. More important. He scked in a breath, chest stuttering, eyes wide and unfocused as the world pitched sideways. Not from the heat. But from the realization bleeding up from whatever part of him the cold always smothered. He wasn't sure which version of him was real. Cold Izuku, silent, obedient, simplified. Heat Izuku, frantic, drowning, too aware. Both of them felt wrong. Incomplete. Like two half-formed creatures taking turns wearing a shape that didn't want them. His fingers curled against the tile, nails scraping hard enough to crack. Steam ghosted around him, swallowed him, blurred the edges of everything. Fragments of thoughts hit him like broken glass. I don't think like myself when I'm cold. I don't feel like myself when I'm warm. What if neither one is me? What if I already changed? What if I never woke up right? His breath hitched, caught, broke into a quiet sound he didn't immediately recognize as a sob. He tried to hold on to something. A memory, a feeling, a single thought that felt like Izuku Midoriya. But everything slipped. Everything felt secondhand. Faded. Misaligned. He didn't know when the last time he'd felt like himself was. And the truth that crawled up his spine, slow and cold and merciless, was this. What if there wasn't a real him anymore? What if the Quirk hadn't changed his body first but his mind? What if this fractured, flickering thing he was now was the only version left? A hollow sound tore out of his throat, half a gasp, half a wail. And the water kept falling as if nothing in the world was wrong. But Izuku could feel it now. Oh, God, he could feel all of it. The cold was killing his emotions. The heat was killing his mind. And he was trapped in the shivering place between them where he wasn't sure which version of him deserved to exist. Or if either one did at all. Friday, March 14th, XX46? POV around 2 hours earlier. The black cat purred under her fingers, its soft, engine-like rumble a gentle thrum against her palm. The vibration soothed her nerves in a way nothing else ever did. Soft things were a rare treat no one could steal from her, and she had no intention of letting anyone take this little boy from her arms. The cat, black with frostwhite tips and a worn red collar, glanced up at her with cool gray eyes. It let out a questioning meow, the empty bell on its collar tapping the chain with a muted, nearly soundless clink. I know, she murmured, voice soft as she cupped the cat's cheeks with both hands. The little creature leaned into her palms with total trust, eyes half-lidded, purring harder, tiny engine rumbling like a comfort he made only for her. You'll get your treat later, she promised, pressing a gentle kiss to his forehead between the frosted hairs. You've been such a good boy. My best boy. He gave a pleased chirp, batting her thumb once before curling into her wrist. Her smile, rare, real, bloomed across her face as she scooped him up and tucked him into her bag. She adjusted the strap so the flap made a snug, warm canopy over him, small enough that he could peek out but hidden enough that the world couldn't take him from her. The boy is on the move again, she sighed, leaning forward over the ledge. Her dark eyes narrowed as she traced Izuku's path below. You'd think after the 4th building he'd give up on whatever this scavenger hunt is. But no. 5th building, 6th building, always something else. Always running. A soft, questioning murmur rose from her bag. I know, she said gently, tapping the bag twice. He never makes things easy for me. Then she stepped off the roof. No hesitation. No bracing. No sound. She dropped the full 50 feet like a falling shadow, hair barely lifting from the wind, body angling with the controlled precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times. She landed in the alley with a silent compression of air, her knees bending the exact amount needed before she rose again without so much as a wince. Not a scrape. Not a displaced pebble. Not even enough noise to spook a stray. Ahead of her, the green-haired boy sprinted out of the narrow street full tilt, heels digging into the pavement as he swung himself into another alley like he was following a route only he could see. Much to her displeasure. He should have been going home. He should have been resting. He should not have been running on legs that were still learning how to live again. A quiet TSK left her lips as she followed him, slipping from shadow to shadow with predator grace. If she hadn't been told to get involved, that boy would still be face down in that creek drowning for hours until either his body quit or he dragged himself out by accident. She had been fortunate not to be spotted while hauling him out of that cursed waterway. Luckier still that she'd be getting another paycheck out of this boy. Maybe a bonus, depending on how long he lasted. And frankly, she did not expect long. She kept after him with silent persistence, matching every abrupt turn he made. When he cut into side streets, she slipped into the shadows. When he darted across intersections, she hopped onto rooftops and paced him from above. When a stray eye found its way down the wrong alley, she scaled a building and melted behind a vent, breath slow, invisible. She tracked him until he reached a large auto shop, the kind of place that stank of rust, rubber, and dying dreams. Only then did she finally crouch on a nearby roof and open a small can of cat food for her boy. He emerged from the bag with a pleased chirp, stretching luxuriously before burying his tiny face in the canned meat. He made soft, muffled meows with every bite, punctuated occasionally by slow blinks up at her as if to reassure her he was, in fact, still alive. She rubbed beneath his chin, watching him eat with something dangerously close to tenderness. Below, the green-haired boy was approached harassed, really, by the pink-haired support girl. Loud. Animated. Obnoxiously unfiltered. She only looked away once. Once. When she glanced back up from scratching her kitten. The boy was gone. Gone. A whole week of tracking him without a single slip-up. 7 days of perfect shadows, perfect timing, perfect angles. And this is when she loses him? When he's farthest from home. When the streets are wide, crowded, and unpredictable? She swore quietly under her breath, the curse muffled by her mask. She exhaled slowly, long enough for the cold frustration to leave her fingers. Then she peeked under the mask at her baby. Looks like your skills are needed once more, little one. The cat answered with a short, irritable murrow, tail flicking left to right, annoyed, but obedient. Don't be like that, she cooed, stroking his head. You're a smart and good boy. So if you could do me this teeny tiny favor, I'll have Iselda order more of those tube snacks you like. He froze mid-lick. Ears perked. Tail stopped flicking. Bribery successful. She loved this little cat. Working with him, however, was another story. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned the streets below, preparing to let him loose. The old memory rose without permission, unfurling in her mind like a page she had read too many times. The day the silver phone rang. It hadn't rung in 43 years. 43 years of silence. 43 years of peace she didn't trust. And then, one night at the shop. Ring. He was on the other end, as always. His monotone was the same, dry, emotionless, but she had heard it long enough to recognize the thin thread of worry woven through. I mustn't call so much, he said, but another problem has arisen from their meddling. She had answered as she always did. As you will it, so I obey. His orders followed, cold as always. Taiwan. Neo-Taipei. Chromium Genetics Lab. Get the animals out. Kill the CEO, the head researcher, and the whole research team. After that, you are to return. Do not bring anything back with you, my little woodlouse. They may have the means to retrieve what they have made. She had paused. Then asked, you'd be able to prevent such an outcome, however? Well, of course. If there is a cat, she said, I'm taking it. And she hung up. She completed the task. Freed over a dozen interesting genetic abominations. Painted the lab in red. Walked out without a scratch. And found a small, pure white kitten curled behind a shattered cryotank. She took him home. Called the phone 4 times. Left voicemails. He never answered. And when she finally woke body numb, head fogged from whatever he had done, the kitten was no longer white. He was black, frosted at the tips like winter-kissed charcoal. A few silver chains had been added to her necklace. Payment. A reminder. A warning. She was never sure which. The cat's longevity wasn't the strangest thing about him. Not by far. But his ability, his quirk, that was what kept her awake during those first few weeks. The way he knew things. The way he found things. He would disappear through doors and windows, slip under cracks in the walls, vanish between floorboards as if the world were stitched with hidden seams only he could see. Sometimes she'd wake to find him asleep on her chest, untouchable, intangible, yet the moment he opened his eyes, she could hold him again. It was part of why she named him the way she did. He would return carrying objects she barely remembered owning. A ring she'd lost decades ago. A photograph she'd burned. A coin dropped on a battlefield long before she was born. And when he wanted to communicate, his small animal mind would brush against hers in a brief, fog-soft whisper, never words, but knowledge hovering at the edge of language. A location. A direction. A silent nudge toward the geoposition of a can of tuna. She didn't ask her cat for much. Only on occasion. His services usually cost her a few thousand yen in treats and premium food. The price of genius, she supposed. But now she needed to find that boy. Sooner rather than later. Because if she was right, losing sight of the green-haired boy wasn't just inconvenient. It was dangerous. What she had seen inside him, the flicker, the surge, the wrongness, was darker than anything she had ever encountered. Quirks didn't frighten her. Not the twisted ones, the broken ones, the ones stitched together like bad anatomy puzzles. People didn't frighten her either, not villains, not heroes, not civilians. Not even him. Not much, at least. But the boy did. Not because he was strong. Not because he was dangerous. Because the thing inside him, whether a natural quirk, a manufactured imitation, or something far more like his, had reacted to her touch like a wounded beast. It had seen her. It had reached for her. And in the same breath, it had tried to shove her away and drag her under. It was the first time in years anything had made her feel uncertain. That was why she took the job. Not for the paycheck, well, a little for the paycheck, who was she kidding? Not for duty, she did that every day without being asked. She took it out of caution. Because if she was right about him, if what she sensed was real, then he wasn't just a boy. He was a problem waiting to wake up. Even pulling him from the water had nearly knocked her out. The quirk, whatever it truly was, natural, manufactured, or one of those whispered about relics, had instinctively dipped into his soul reserve. It had almost killed him in the act, and it had lashed out at her with that same vital force. Hostile. Instinctive. Hungry. The fact that he was still coherent, still alive, still him, instead of a mindless husk like others whose quirks tampered with their soul in similar ways. That alone told her he was a ticking time bomb if he ever tapped into all of it. She had been around far too long, seen far too many quirks, to mistake the signs. He was a danger. To others. To himself. To everyone. And worst of all, she wasn't entirely sure he even knew. A small, tired part of her wanted to tell him to slow down, to be careful, to live the quiet life a child his age should have. But boys like him didn't get quiet lives. People born with soul-deep power, people like her, like he who wove destinies from the roots of the world, were never granted that kind of peace. His destiny wasn't going to let him rest. Not with the beast in the dark still moving pieces from the shadows. Not with that forsaken light still wandering the earth, hunting all who opposed its master's will. Not when he still had need of them. The thoughts left a tremor in her chest, small, but real. She exhaled slowly, steadying herself, fingers instinctively seeking out the one thing that could calm her. She gave her cat a few more reassuring scratches behind the ear, listening as he purred for several steady seconds before the sound tapered into silence. The simple weight of him grounded her more than any breathing exercise ever could. "Okay, little ghost," she murmured, brushing her thumb along his frosted ear to quiet the last of the shaking inside her. "Show me where the boy is." The cat blinked at her, slow, solemn, then his head snapped sharply to the left. He gave a loud, decisive meow and began moving. Not running. Little ghost never ran. He stepped with purpose, tail held like a banner, paws making no sound on the rooftop. She let him take the lead. He hated it when she got ahead of him. Little ghost reached the edge of the building and leapt. Midair, his frost-dusted black fur dissolved into rippling shadow. A smear of smoke and ink. Before he landed cleanly on the next rooftop and solidified again. He glanced back at her with a questioning murrow. A small, "Your turn." Only then did she follow. He bounded across the cityscape, 2 rooftops, 3, then 4, each jump sending a faint distortion through his form as if the edges of him weren't entirely anchored to the world. Every time she closed the distance, he was already preparing the next leap. His body grew fuzzier, shadow bleeding from his paws like spilled ink until he reformed again. Search mode. She knew the signs. Her heart tightened with each turn he made. The boy was unpredictable on foot. But Little Ghost was never wrong. Finally, after the last blur of motion, he landed on a low building across from a familiar street. He stopped, back arched, tail wrapped around his paws. His form flickered once black to shadow to black, and then he stared at a particular home with icy certainty. The Midoriya residence. Of course, she muttered. She felt ridiculous. All that rooftop hopping, all that stealth, all that tension. And the boy had simply gone home. Little Ghost let out a faint, trembling MRRP. His body wavered like heat on asphalt, signs of exhaustion. She knelt and scooped him up from the cold rooftop. His fur was chilled. His tiny muscles shivered. He'd pushed himself harder than he should have. She tucked him against her chest. "Good kitty," she whispered, stroking the back of his head. "You did such a good job. Though maybe next time, just tell me instead of sprinting across half the city." He meowed in sharp protest. The tone unmistakable. "No." Right, she sighed, amused despite herself. "You wanted to run. I get it. Come on, let me get your brush." She stepped back from the edge, cat tucked safely in her arms, eyes drifting once more toward the Midoriya home. The boy was inside. Alive. For now. Hunter's Journal. New critters are added to the journal as the eyes perceive them. Fujita. Species, human, soft. Easily startled. Quirk, stop emitter. The boy freezes things. Not time, just things. Objects halt in the air like insects caught in amber. 2 at once for long. More if he wants them to fall sooner. He does not yet know the danger of his own stillness. Some creatures thrive when the world pauses. Others hunt. Harmless. For now. But what he did during that Halloween night should not be forgotten so easily. Saito. Species, human, smells like old candy wrappers. Quirk, drowsy emitter. Touch brings collapse. A soft fall into sleep. Or a stumble, a sway, a glazed smile. Humans gather around him the way moths gather around warm things. Some of his classmates name the ability villainous. I do not think he minds. He has gentle hands. That is rare. Would nap well beside a heater, if sleep would come so easily after the creak. Little Ghost the most magnanimous. Species, possibly, cat. Unconfirmed. But the best. Quirk, world sense emitter mutant hybrid. I see the threads of place. The shape of lost things. I feel the empty spaces between walls and slip through them. I press my thoughts gently to those who understand soft speech. She calls it, knowing too much. I call it, useful. I catalog, I watch. Tuna, northwest drawer. Forgotten for 3 days. Will retrieve later. Disgust at human greed and hate.
Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification. So when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.